Their work will be remembered as one of the greatest moments of this planet.
Mr. Scout. I know you're still weighing whether to return to Lumon. But the Mark I've come to know is happy.
Hello, is anyone there? Is the board on? It's Mark S. from Macro...
What you all did was one of the most painful moments in the history of this company.
What the hell?
But the four of you have become known as the face of Severance reform.
Okay, so we're not in trouble?
I don't think so. Milchick said we're famous.
All of us equally, or one of us is like the star?
Now if you feel that you can't go on.
So what the hell did you guys see up there?
It's not our world up there.
And your life is filled with much confusion.
My Outie's wife died a few years ago. Except the woman is Miss Casey.
So what are you gonna do?
I gotta get her out of here.
Mark, your Annie said she's alive.
This is obscene.
I just want to be sure.
And your world around is coming down.
Why did you do this? What is this all about?
Do you know something about Gemma?
Mark, there'll be no honeymoon ending for you.
Their work will be remembered as one of the greatest moments of this planet.
You don't value them. You fear them. We fear no one.
I'm tightening the leash.
If we let this happen to Miss Casey, who's gonna step up when it happens to us?
Now. Goodbye, Marcus.
Wait!
My name is Miss Huang. It's my first day here as deputy manager. Mark W.
Why are you a child?
Because of when I was born.
And welcome all to Severance Saturday. Happy Sevy Saturday. It finally is my favorite day of the week, personally, where PM and I finally get a chance to dive into all of the nitty-gritty details of the latest episode of Severance. And I must say, this episode definitely had that in abundance in terms of nitty-gritty details and some interesting reveals as we finally got a look at the testing room floor and all of the grueling, absolutely grueling tests that they have been putting Gemma through over the past 5 years, as we have found out. And I must say, this was a really, really good episode from start to finish. The writing was great, but I really have to take a moment and praise two performers in this episode. One, Jessica Lee Gagne, the director of this episode, who is usually the Severance cinematographer. This was her directorial debut, the first time she had ever sat in the director's chair, and she did a phenomenal job. She brought that usual unique blend of awesome cinematography and just some of the most beautiful transition shots I have ever seen in filmmaking to this day, mixed with just her overall general aesthetic and just having a very good cinematography eye. So I was so happy to see her have her directorial debut and to see that it was so well received by pretty much the whole fandom. So many people have been praising this episode's cinematography, and for a very good reason. So I have to give her shout out. And of course, also have to give a shout out to Daichin Lachman as well, the actress who plays Gemma / Miss Casey. She was phenomenal in this episode from start to finish. And I imagine from an actress's standpoint, she's only been in a very small handful of scenes up until this point. So I imagine she hasn't had a whole lot of time to really flesh out the character of Gemma in particular, considering Gemma has barely been on screen at all. But it seems like she really dove in and completely fleshed out this character of Gemma in the span of one episode with all of these beautiful flashbacks and you really got a good sense of who Mark and Gemma were before the accident, the strains that their marriage undergo, seeing all of the dark shit that they had to go through, leading to the inevitable accident, Mark getting the news of her not so death. But I have to start off by just praising both of those performers, the phenomenal directing and cinematography from Jessica Lee Gagne and the brilliant performance from Dai-Chen. They absolutely killed it in this episode.
No, it was absolutely amazing. The transitions were so beautiful. And they actually did a podcast where they had her on, and she specifically talked about the transitions and how important they were to her. And also mentioned that she didn't want to do it. She was kind of like pushed into it because they
Really?
thought she would do a good job. And I'm so glad that she did.
Wow, that I did not know. See, I always catch these podcasts a day late and a dollar short, and they always have some fascinating information in them. But no, that's incredibly interesting to know that it was something that she was maybe a little bit hesitant at first, but I imagine she just had so much support around her. Just seeing how good of a cinematographer she is. Usually, when you have that good of an eye for camera shots, angles, transitions, that kind of job usually does transition well to the director's chair. So that's interesting to know that she was a little hesitant at first, but I'm glad she did it. I'm certainly glad she did it, and now I really hope she gets the opportunity to direct more episodes in the future. She was great, absolutely great. This episode had some really memorable shots. I mean, I feel like Severance always has some memorable shots, but this episode in particular, it was just one after the next of just iconic cinematography, cinematic shots, really, where sometimes a TV show will go above and beyond, and they will bring forth that kind of feature film length quality. And I feel like Severance does have that. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like I'm watching a TV show. It feels like I'm watching a mini movie because it's just so well produced. So yeah, I'm super happy to hear that she was hesitant at first, but ended up doing the job because man, she killed it. Absolutely killed it. Wow. Wow, wow,
She
wow.
did. And I know people in your Discord were talking about how, and you've said this before about different episodes that have been so together, right? That we get
Mm,
beginning to end. They were saying this could have been the finale. And
yeah.
I thought so too. We got so many answers, or maybe it's just that we're so used to shows like From, where we get no answers. And so getting an episode where we got to find out pretty much everything that has been going on with Gemma since the beginning. And it could have been the finale. I would have been satisfied.
I think I would have been too. I think I would have been too. I mean, just considering everything we got in this episode, the feel of it, the scope of it, it felt like we were kind of getting a peek behind the curtain of not just Severance, but Lumon in particular. Like seeing Lumon in a new light that we have never even seen before, which we're definitely going to dive into here tonight as well. But yeah, I mean, it did kind of have that season finale feel to it, where it was that profound, that well made of an episode. So yeah, this could have been a finale, and I would have been satisfied. Definitely, absolutely, absolutely. But yeah, let us know what you guys think in the chat as well. Did you enjoy episode 7 of Severance? Chikhai Bardo, did you guys like the cinematography? What performances were standing out to you guys as well? Let us know what you guys thought of episode 7 as well. And speaking of the awesome, awesome chat, let's see who we got in here on this fine Saturday night evening. Sevi Saturday is here, ladies and gentlemen. We got Pam Jam in the house. What is up, Pam Jam? Good to see you. We got Kiwi Skirt in the building. Welcome, welcome, Kiwi Skirt. We got King Sportal in the house. What is up, Kings? Always good to see you as well. Let's see what else we got here. We got Robert Saunders in the building. What is up, Robert? Always good to see you, my friend. Robert, I don't know if you're catching up on Severance or if you're watching it or not, but if you do ever catch up on Severance, definitely let me know some of your thoughts and theories. Robert always had some of the best From theories in the fandom. Really, really good, well thought out, super intricate. I would love to hear Robert's take on Severance if and when he gets a chance to catch up on it, for sure. For sure. Let's see what else we got. We got Robert Pattinson in the house as well. Quick question: when Mark wakes up at the end of the episode, is he fully reintegrated? Open to everyone? Yes/no. That's a really good question, and I have been wondering that myself as well. Because obviously, we did see last week he went through a pretty grueling experimental procedure that Ragabi refers to as "quote unquote" flooding the chip. In order to speed up the reintegration process. And then, yes, at the very end of the episode, we finally see him wake up out of his kind of comatose fever dream that he was in. So that's a good question. Yeah, let me know what you guys think in the chat. Do you guys think Mark is fully reintegrated now, or does he still have a little ways to go? What about you, PM? You think his reintegration is done, or you think he's still has a little ways?
You know what, Robert? I was thinking the same thing. However, when I went back and I looked at what he was processing, because I think the episode was what he was processing,
Mhm.
it's a lot of the backstory and the past. It's not so many of the scenes where any Mark was with Gemma. We get maybe
Yes.
one. So,
Mhm.
because I didn't see a good balance of both, I think not quite. So he might be getting there, but not quite yet.
I think that's a good observation too, because that is right. I mean, when we see Mark having all of these kind of flashbacks, all of these memories flooding in, it did seem it was very heavily Mark and Gemma focused. And like you mentioned, we only literally get one any Mark scene. So if that balance was a little more balanced, then yeah, I think I would probably be a little more inclined to think the reintegration is fully complete. But since it wasn't, I think he's going to have still a little ways to go. I guess my question going forward is, will flooding the chip have any kind of negative side effects on the reintegration process? I know they initially did it because Ragabi thought this would speed up the reintegration. But with reintegration in and of itself being such an experimental procedure, something that I imagine she still doesn't know the full ins and outs of, could flooding the chip ultimately harm the process instead of help it? I guess is my question, is what I'm a little bit worried about. Well, how is Mark going to be in episode 8? Will he be just continuing down that road of reintegration, or will we start to see that he's running into some roadblocks now because they did an experimental procedure on top of what is already an experimental procedure? So I'm a little worried about his psyche, but I'm hoping he's going to be okay. Hoping he's going to be all right. But no, that's a great question. That is a great question, Robert. Is he fully reintegrated? I mean, man, I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, good question, Robert. Hard to know, but I'm going to say no, but further along, maybe. Maybe, and maybe it is that. Maybe he's a little further along the way. Maybe this did ultimately help. There is a possibility that it did help the reintegration process and that it's not going to hinder it anyway. So that is definitely a possibility as well. Um, yeah, I guess we're going to have to see. I guess we are going to have to see. We got Christine, unpronounceable. What is up? Good to see you as well. I see Forever Autumn is in the chat. Welcome, Forever Autumn. I see Ghost MKC. Best episode yet in every way. The ending is sure to be something special. Yeah, again, this might be my favorite episode of the season. I've really enjoyed every episode up to. I mean, episode 4 was my favorite episode of the season. Just seeing the phenomenal performance of John Turturro in that episode, seeing Innie Irving kind of take charge, conquer his own temper of conquering woe, seeing him uncover Helena and freeing Helly from her prison. That was my favorite episode of the season, but I don't know. This one might rival that in terms of my favorite episode. What about you, PM? And what about you guys in the chat as well? Do you have a favorite episode of season 2 so far?
I mean, this one is a great pick because
Yeah.
it had everything, right? We got so many answers and it was beautifully filmed. So it makes a lot of sense to pick this one. However, I just have to be true to myself and my feelings. Nothing's ever going to top the Do It, Seth. What did he say? I'm going to kill a Mr. Milkshake.
I'm gonna
That's
kill him,
my
Mr.
all-time
Milkshake.
favorite. All-time favorite.
I mean, that is tough to beat, isn't it? That really is tough to beat. John Turturro's just incredible dialogue, the incredible way he emotes, the way he delivers his lines, and the way that episode was written, and the way that that episode was kind of completely different from anything we had ever seen on Severance up until this point. I kind of got that feeling a little bit with this episode as well, where it did feel a little bit different than your normal average Severance episode. Maybe it was the great cinematography mixed with the flashbacks, finally seeing Gemma and Mark before the accident. The show doesn't do a whole lot of big flashbacks like this. And when they use them, they seem to utilize them in a very sparing manner, but very profoundly when they do use them. So yeah, I mean, it's tough for me. It's got to be between this and episode 4. I mean, I don't know. I'll have to think on it and ultimately decide a winner. But as you mentioned, hearing John Turturro at the end of that episode, "Do it, Seth. I'm gonna kill him, Mr. Milchick." It was just so iconic. Like, that episode will go down in Severance history for so long as one of the most iconic episodes for sure. So that is a tough one to beat. Very tough one to beat. Good stuff. Good stuff. But yeah, what do you guys think? What are you guys thinking of episode 7? Let us know in the chat. What were your favorite scenes? What was some of your favorite episodes? Was this your favorite episode? Definitely let us know. 88 Key says episode 7 was fantastic. It was indeed very fantastic episode. I do enjoy Drummond's voice. I do too, actually. It's funny you say that. I kind of like the way Drummond speaks. He's got that very interesting kind of like Swedish Nordic accent to him a little bit, and it just makes him that much more mysterious in the role that he's in Lumon. So yeah, I very much enjoy anytime we get Drummond scenes, especially when he's making fun of the ridiculous sweater that the creepiest dentist in the world is wearing. That was so good. That was really good. Yeah, great stuff. We got Jen, the teacher, in the house. Welcome, Jen. We got Peach in the house as well. Welcome, Peach. Good to see each and every one of you. And again, big thank you to everybody for joining us on our Sevi Saturday as we dive super deep into all of what occurred on our recent episode of Severance. I see the Rogue Prince. I see Luke Starkiller as well. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I see Monk of Magnesia. Monk of Magnesia. Welcome. Welcome. Love that. Absolutely love that. I see Brecken in the house as well. Welcome, Brecken. I see Art in the building as well. I see Xavier Anderson. Always good to see Xavier. I know Xavier always has some really good takes, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what you had to think of this episode, my friend. Definitely let me know in the chat at some point. What were some of your favorite scenes? What was your favorite scene from episode 7? Not just Xavier, but each and every one of you guys in the chat. Did you have one particular favorite scene from episode 7? And did you as well, PM? Is there one scene that you enjoyed above the rest? Or even if not just one scene, was there one aspect that you enjoyed above the rest, whether it's the focus on the flashbacks, the focus on seeing Gemma down in these rooms, the focus on Mark kind of being laid out? Did you have a favorite storyline or a favorite scene?
I did. And it's not going to be because it was beautiful or because it was a good scene. It's going to be because of how honest and how real it was, and
I
it's going
know
to
what
be
you're going to
the
say.
miscarriage scene.
Yes. I
Now,
knew it.
the reason why that's my favorite scene is because it was filmed in a very honest way where you could really see what somebody goes through. And usually, you just kind of get like 1 minute or two. The person doesn't really show us the breakdown. They just kind of tell their partner that it didn't work out. But in this scene, you saw how a miscarriage goes beyond just not being able to have a baby. It breaks someone, right? And when we see her get into the bathtub still wearing her clothes, it shows you how completely heartbreaking it is and how it just shatters your life, right? The water also, when they did the reversing of the water and the water starts like flowing up instead of flowing down, I thought was an excellent transition. But it's this scene because it shows us how broken Gemma was.
It really is. Sometimes it's scenes like this that don't need to be the biggest or most extravagant scenes. Sometimes it's just the scenes that really showcase something in a truthful manner, where you bring up a lot of good points where, I mean, we've seen tons of miscarriage scenes in films and television for years, but like you said, it's usually the initial reaction and then the aftermath. You never really actually get to see a get to be, the in between of how really dark it can really be, how bloody it can get. And I do agree with you. I feel like they did showcase this scene in a very more realistic way than I think we've seen in the past. And that is one thing I do really enjoy about Severance. When they dive into some of their darker scenes, they tend to handle these scenes with care and with respect. And I like the final product, the way it kind of comes across when it's done. You do get that sense where they wanted to take their time with this scene, even though it's only a 20-second scene in a 1 hour episode. You can still tell they took so much time and care to portray this in a realistic and honest way, because this is something that many people can relate to that have gone through themselves.
Yes. Um, Not only that, but like the chat is saying, right? The chat that knows all. It
Chat knows all.
humanized Gemma because we
Yeah,
see this perfect Gemma. We know her as Miss Casey, and
yeah.
her appearance as Miss Casey, it's perfection, right? Everybody always mentions how put together she is, how beautiful she is, but this humanized her. Her hair wasn't perfect. She was having real human emotions, going through difficult things like this. So I totally agree with the chat. Um, some of the chat is saying that they didn't necessarily feel bad for Gemma until this episode. And I agree. This episode really makes you feel so bad for her. And it makes you see that she was that light in Mark's life. If anything, she was the best part of the relationship, really, when it came to those two.
She was in many ways. We kind of see this idealistic version of this relationship at the very beginning when we first get introduced to Mark and Gemma. But the cracks are kind of always there right from the very beginning. And even you pointed this out yet when we were watching the episode for the first time, in terms of just some of the ways that Mark kind of interacts with her can be a little strange and cold, even when he's not trying to be cold. Like, who are you, by the way? Like, how? That's not the best way to introduce yourself or to ask for someone's name. Who are you, by the way? Like,
He's so
so
lucky that Gemma went for that because if I met someone and their introduction to me or to a relationship is like, and who are you?
and
Like,
who
who
are
are
you?
you? I didn't find it endearing, and that's also kind of a very refreshing thing about Severance, that they didn't make it a fairy tale love story.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
the writer talked about that it was a realistic love story, so it wasn't these two
Mhm.
people that were perfect for each other and no fighting, it was realistic. And I think that you could see that with Mark being the way that he was.
Yeah. Yeah, you can. And I do like that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the whole fairy tale idealized version of a relationship. That's all well and good. But the real world is usually a little bit more complicated than that, a little bit more nuanced when you get into these kinds of relationships, especially a long-term relationship that Mark and Gemma seem to share. And yeah, sometimes it's better to showcase realism as opposed to just putting forth that fairy tale idealistic version of the perfect relationship that doesn't always exist in real life. I mean, it does sometimes. I mean, I know some people are lucky enough to feel that and find that kind of love. But sometimes relationships can really turn into something dark that started off very beautiful. And I think they showcase that in a very realistic way that you feel for these people. And I totally understand people saying that this was the first episode that they really actually felt bad for Gemma, because it was kind of hard to relate to Gemma before this episode because we hadn't really seen her a whole lot. We didn't see much of
Mhm.
Gemma at all. We saw only a handful of Miss Casey and practically no Gemma apart from a few pictures here and there, and hearing just kind of background details about the kind of person that she was from Mark, from Devin, from Rickon in Rickon's book. You actually pointed that out to me,
Mhm.
that in Rickon's book, we find out that Rickon and Gemma kind of had a pretty special relationship between those two, where Rickon was always kind of searching for approval. He always wanted to kind of connect with his brother-in-law. He always wanted Mark's approval, and how sometimes they wouldn't be too nice to him. They would even make fun of him at times. But Gemma was always there with a kind word to kind of reinforce that, give him that kind of pep talk that he needs, that one person in his corner that everybody needs every once in a while. So yeah, I mean, we might have heard a little bit about Gemma up until this point, but now I feel like we really got a chance to fully meet her.
And even in this scene, we could see Mark and his sister are going back and forth, making fun of Rickon as he's trying to explain to them that he's really good at climbing, which he's not. But he's trying to explain it to them. And they keep going back and forth, making fun of Rickon. Rickon says, I think we need to spend more time together, Mark. And Mark says, absolutely not. And we see Gemma, she's smiling, but she's not participating in the mockery of Rickon. So even in this scene, we could see who she was to the relationship between the four.
Very true. Very true. She's always the kind of the grounded one, the one that that isn't going to kind of jump on the bandwagon when she sees Mark and Devin doing this. And I imagine that could be a little bit hard for Rickon to see your wife and your brother-in-law kind of, you know, make fun of you a little bit, even if they are trying to do it in a lighthearted manner. At the end of the day, that is going to hurt a little bit every once in a while. And for Gemma to kind of always be there and be that kind of, you know, that humanity inside Gemma kind of really comes through. Where yeah, she doesn't join in on the laugh. She doesn't join in on making fun of Rickon. She supports him. She tries to be an encouraging voice in his life. And I think that's why Rickon spoke so highly about her in that book that you were mentioning. Yeah, we got to see an interesting dynamic, a very interesting side. I feel like we finally met Gemma, like really met Gemma for the first time in this episode. Like we finally know who this character is. And yeah, really good. Really,
Yeah,
really
the
good.
opening to the episode was shocking because they just opened with Gemma as a normal person, and it shocked me. We didn't get
Yeah.
to be introduced to her slowly. It was just her walking on campus as a normal person, and I'm not
Yeah.
used to seeing her that way. But I do feel like it humanized her, and it also let us know how broken you have to be in order to participate in what's going on, really, because we do see her participating and answering the questionnaires, right?
Yep. Yep. She is. It's I think that's the perfect way to put it. It does kind of humanize her, where up until this point she has been presented to us in this kind of almost robotic like state, where she never seems fully human. She doesn't seem to have the intricacies of human emotion. This Miss Casey persona did seem like it was literally born yesterday every time you see her, and we even hear her from her in season one state that the few hours she spent on the MDR floor observing Helly is the longest time she's ever been awake for. So this Miss Casey persona is still fresh out of, you know, still just completely new, a complete baby still. And when you see a character portrayed in that light, in this kind of robotic way over and over and over again, that's the kind of image you start to just cultivate in your mind when thinking of this character. So starting the episode off like this, where we do see Gemma was just a normal woman, a normal, good-hearted woman, apparently, even going as so far as to go donate blood. So it humanized Gemma right from the start. So you got to see the human behind the character, that this robotic Miss Casey is not all there is. There is a genuine human with layers under there that they really did a phenomenal job peeling back this episode, starting with that first scene, as you mentioned. Really good stuff.
And it's funny that you say layers, right? Because
Yeah.
we know
Oh,
that's the
yes.
perfect way to put it. There is a human being underneath all of those layers. Literally, she could say that she has layers to herself. Just about the only person that could say that, because she does indeed.
She does. She does. She has layers to her. And you were talking about something very interesting the other night in terms of Gemma, and not just Gemma, but everything she's going through on the Severance floor. How it very does closely resemble the nesting doll, which we do see one of them in the actual episode. These nesting dolls that are almost the perfect kind of metaphor for what Gemma is going through down on that severed floor, where we see her, the regular Gemma that we know, kind of severed into all of these different multiple versions of Gemma, each of which are Gemma, but none of which share memories from one to the other. And it did kind of, I thought that was a really good metaphor on your part, that it was the perfect kind of parallel with a nesting doll. And I think that's why we see it in the episode. I mean, they must have thrown that in there for a reason, because it's super similar.
Yeah, and really all credit to your Discord. If you guys haven't joined the Discord, join the Discord. Because we were having a conversation on there about the episode, and one of the Sevis said she's like a Russian nesting doll. And so when
Mm.
I looked into the meaning of these Russian nesting dolls, the matryoshka, and I'm probably not saying it correctly, you guys, but the matryoshka doll, um, it stands for motherhood and fertility and legacy, which is what it is to be a mother, to create life, right, that goes beyond yourself. So
Mhm.
when it comes to what we saw on screen and her journey, it included a lot of sorrow for not being able to perform this um, idea of like motherhood and having a child. And it also included why she would go as far as she did, right? Answering the questionnaires and putting
Yeah.
in the work because she wanted so badly to be a mother, right? Because I
Yeah.
think that Mark kind of, he's not nice, but he did kind of have a point when he's talking about the cards. Like, why are you answering those questions? Why are
Mhm.
you sending back and forth paperwork to Lumen about just random cards? And the answer to that is because of this brokenness, this journey, the difficulty, right? She's willing to do anything. And I thought that it was really like a perfect metaphor. So it was one of the sevis on Discord.
Oh, awesome, awesome, awesome. And yeah, I mean, the chat, whether it's here on YouTube or in the Discord, you guys do come up with some of the coolest ideas and theories that we see anywhere in the fandom, and it's always cool to hear everybody's take on these episodes. That's why we love doing these. We genuinely love just hearing what you guys have to think about these episodes. And Art asks, she's a different innie for each room. Yes, and I know that was one thing that was kind of. I mean, even myself, I had to watch this episode a few times before I fully got a full grasp on what kind of think what they're doing to Gemma in this episode. But yes, essentially they took Gemma's personality and severed it into multiple different Gemmas, where she's got all of these different Gemmas inside of her. Each one is Gemma, but they don't retain memories from one to the other. So when Gemma is going into the Wellington room to have this dentist procedure done, and then when she leaves, that Gemma doesn't remember what happened behind that door. When she goes into another room and goes through another trial, whether it's the Christmas room, that Gemma is also a different Gemma. So they're all Gemmas, but they're all different, separate, severed Gemmas from one another. With, of course, Miss Casey being another version of another personality that is already inside of her as well. But yeah, each room was a different severed Gemma that she was going through. And we hear Drummond kind of explain a little bit as to why that was the case. And even a few days ago, we heard a very interesting interview from Dan Erickson when he started kind of out of nowhere bringing up the idea of what can and cannot transcend the severance barrier. What can be carried over from innie to outie or from one personality to the next? And I even brought this up a few weeks ago in my episode breakdown when I first heard him talking about it, because we've already seen a few examples of certain things transcending the severance barrier. Whether it's Irving in episode 4 and his innie kind of tapping into the training of his outie, transcending the severance barrier. And Dan Erickson even spoke a little bit about Helly and Helena, how there's might be a potential possibility where they are transcending the severance barrier themselves as well, with Helly having such strong feelings for Mark to the point where even Helena herself is getting some of these genuine strong feelings for Mark too. So it's one thing that he always said that he wanted to leave a little bit ambiguous, but it looks like they are exploring it a little bit more now. And it seemed like that was a big part, not the full part, but that was part of why they severed Gemma into so many different personalities and why they're putting her through all of these different tests and all of these different rooms. They want to see what will and what will not transcend the severance barrier. Pain, emotions, guilt, trauma, fear. We see her get put into all of these different positions. If you notice, just about every room she's in is focusing on a different emotion, whether it's guilt or fear or trauma. Each room is kind of bringing something different out of Gemma. And that is ultimately what they're trying to do, to see if things will transcend the severance barrier. And since most of them are kind of being self-contained from one to the other, they took that as a sign that the technology is working. So yeah, insane to see to hear what they did for Gemma. I am at least a little bit relieved that there is at least some Gemma left deep down, because I know that was a big fear of mine, that at one point Mark would eventually rescue Miss Casey. They would eventually get her out of Lumon, only to realize that Gemma is completely gone, that all that is left is Miss Casey. And maybe that could potentially happen when Cold Harbor reaches 100% and they are fully done refining Gemma. Maybe that is a possibility. But as of right now, it's good to know that there is a Gemma still inside there somewhere. Gemma isn't gone.
Not yet. Not yet. But like, for example, in this picture that you have up, they bring up the book. You were talking about the book that she mentions, right? And the parallels. She also, before she brings up the title of the book, she says themes of religious conversion. And
Yes.
I've always said, like, Lumon is a corporate cult. They don't look at their CEO as a CEO, they look at him as a god. And so it explains why somebody would have to be broken down in order to be built in their image.
Yeah.
When I did some research as to like religious conversion, it's usually finding people who are in a transitional space and are going through difficulties that makes them the prime target to be part of a cult, right? It's this transition a spot, right? Like not being able to have a child, going through infertility, so that they could then break you and tell you that they have the solution for your problem. So I think it relates perfectly to what they were going through, their journey, and what made them perfect for it. Now, as far
Yeah.
as Gemma, you do see her holding on to herself, holding on to who she is. We see that she keeps asking about Mark and
Yeah.
she keeps thinking about Mark. However, I think that she's lying. I don't think that the barriers are holding, because when they ask her about the hallway, they say, you know, what did you feel in the hallway? She says nothing. But when she's in her room getting ready for the Christmas card scene, she shudders because she sees the outfit, she puts on the ring. And so that tells you she remembers. She knows what's going to happen. She's just answering the way that they want her to answer, I think. Otherwise, she wouldn't remember. There's no point to be afraid, right?
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's actually a very good point. And considering the circumstance that she is in, especially when Prime Gemma, I like to call her Prime Gemma, the original Gemma. Just about every time we see Gemma in this, I saw a lot of people referring to it as this Star Trek like outfit. This is Prime Gemma. This is the original Gemma, her original personality. She originally gets severed into a bunch of different other Gemmas, but this is the original Prime Gemma. When she's not in any of the other rooms, she tends to always be in this persona. And yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting idea, where if she is aware of what is going on, even in the slightest, I mean, would you tell Lumon? I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense, that even if she is remembering something from one room to the next, she's keeping it to herself. I think that would make sense for who Gemma is, in terms of that probably helping her survive, not wanting to tell Lumon that she is experiencing things from room to room. So that makes sense. I could totally see her maybe not telling the full truth there, and maybe remembering a little bit from room to room. That actually makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, man, this episode just had so much. It really did have so much. And at the very beginning, like you were talking about the themes of religious conversion, and the book that Gemma is reading at the beginning, the death of Ivan Ilyich. Now, I go a little bit deeper into this on my episode 7 breakdown video, which will be up on the channel tomorrow, but there are some interesting parallels just on the surface of this book that Gemma is reading at the beginning of the episode. Now, not only do we notice that it's very interesting that they're donating blood while talking about this book. And basically, the book, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, showcases the kind of how Ivan himself grapples with the idea of his own mortality. He's a high-ranking official in the court of he's a high-ranking official at court, and highly respected, well liked by his colleagues, and slowly but surely he's confronted with a life-threatening illness, a mortal illness, and he struggles to kind of come to terms with his own mortality, which is not only something that we see very much paralleled in Kier himself. We know that Kier, towards the end of his life, was also going through a very similar transition when he knew his health was failing and he was struggling to confront his own mortality. And I just thought it was a very interesting way to introduce the episode, where we have Gemma donating blood while talking about this book. Essentially, Gemma gifting the very gift of life while reading about one confronting their own death. So I thought that was a very interesting contrast to start the episode off on. And I love when Severance does these little things like that. Really good stuff. Really good stuff. Let me get to these super chats. We got 2 super chats in the chat. Thank you guys so much. Very much appreciate you. We got Jackson Perez for $4.99. Thank you so much, Jackson. This episode pummels episode 4 into the dirt. Easily the best episode of the show for me. Crushes 7 and 9 from season 1 easily. Okay, Jackson, I like it. I like it, my friend. Love hearing the enthusiasm. Yeah, I mean, it really was such a good episode. This episode definitely had my favorite cinematography up until this point. I'm still going back and forth as to whether or not this or episode 4 is my all-time favorite. But man, this episode definitely had some of the best shots I've ever seen on Severance. And the transitions in particular were flawless, super seamless, super beautiful. Having a bad transition from scene to scene can sometimes take me out of an episode, even if only for a split second. But sometimes if you just see like a really bad transition, it can kind of be a little bit jarring at times. You want transitions from scene to scene to be seamless. You want them to flow within the kind of overall feeling that the episode is going for. And I think with Jessica Lynn Gagne being a cinematographer and her stepping into the director's chair for this episode, she was perfectly well suited to kind of nail that aspect of those transitions. I think my favorite one was this beautiful transition where we transition from where Gemma is, and we kind of literally follow the wires. We follow the Lumon wires that lead downstairs into this other room where Drummond is. And it was just a beautiful transition as you follow these wires and end up into this other room. And scenes like that can be jarring at times if they're not filmed right. But that scene was so well put together. It just flowed so well. That was probably my favorite transition I've seen in a very long time of any show. But no, I'm glad to know that you are enjoying the season, Jackson. I'm glad to know that you enjoyed episode 7, my friend. If you were going to pick a favorite episode of Severance, this would be a pretty good one to pick. So awesome, man. Awesome.
And you're right, Jackson. I totally agree with you. I know that I didn't pick the best one, but I just think that whole line, it's so iconic. But you're right. I agree with you.
It is a very iconic line. I mean, in terms of iconic lines going down in Severance history, I think episode 4 probably has the most of those, whether it's the one you mentioned, yes, do it, Seth, or I'm going to kill him, Mr. Melchick, or my personal favorite, marshmallows are for team players, Dylan. They don't just hand them out. Love it. Love the dialogue from those episodes, from that episode. But no, really good pick, Jackson. Really good pick. And thank you again so much for the $4.99, my friend. Very much appreciate you. Here we got Robert Saunders, one of our Frumily members, been hanging out with us for a while now. Always had really great ideas on From, so I'm loving to hear what you think about Severance. Sorry I am late to the game. The parallels between Kier Eagan and L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology, are innumerable. Have you discussed how Eagan's quotes/words seem to mirror Hubbard in some instances, word for word? I haven't dove into that. I'm not very knowledgeable on Scientology or L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, I know who he is. I know what Scientology is, but I'm not very versed on the ins and outs of them. One thing I did dive super deep into and broke down extensively are the incredibly similarities, like the really incredible similarities between Kier Eagan's quotes and the quotes in the original Mary Shelley Victor Frankenstein. They're incredibly similar characters. Victor Frankenstein and Kier Eagan mirror each other in so many ways, it's not even funny. From the maniacal kind of genius trying to create life where life shouldn't exist. There's so many similarities. I actually did a video diving into all of the parallels between Kier Eagan and Victor Frankenstein and the story of Severance and Frankenstein itself as a story. You might think on the surface that Severance and Frankenstein don't really have a whole lot in common, but when you dive a little bit deeper and look at the actual original novel of Frankenstein written by Mary Shelley, it's much different. It's a lot different than all of the Frankenstein adaptations that we see in movies and films. I mean, it's just a whole, they kind of have turned it into a whole different story where Frankenstein's monster has kind of just turned into this kind of pop culture phenomenon figure. But if you read the original Frankenstein, it's a lot darker. It's a lot scarier at times. And seeing what Kier Eagan and Victor Frankenstein are both willing to do, the lengths that they are willing to go in order to achieve their own ends, and how they do both want to be kind of worshipped as a deity-like figure. That was a lot of fun diving into. Again, not very knowledgeable on L. Ron Hubbard, but if anybody is a Victor Frankenstein fan, I would highly recommend checking out my Victor Frankenstein and Kier Eagan video. And I dive super deep into all of their similarities. But I imagine L. Ron Hubbard and Kier probably have a lot of similarities as well. I mean, if you're pointing them out, I am sure there's a lot there to be found as well. But thank you so much, Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. And I agree with you. So
yeah,
I am kind of like, I tend to get lost in topics sometimes, and I went down a Scientology rabbit hole.
You research tons of
and
stuff. I know that. You're super smart. So if anyone knows a little bit about this, it's you. Awesome.
And Robert is right on. Not only did he have similar ideas, but we also know that a lot of people went missing, including his wife. He had a wife that everybody said started behaving differently, and she went missing. She just disappeared, and people tend to disappear around him. Not only disappeared, but once they reappear, they no longer are blowing the whistle. So sometimes you have people who speak out against the Church of Scientology, and they disappear for a little while, they come back and they're all in, and everything is fine, and nothing was ever wrong. So it also has this sort of like brainwashing that goes on. I don't know, allegedly. But yeah, I find that to be similar, allegedly.
Now I imagine there's probably tons of similarities there. I mean, just the way that Kier and Lumon itself is run, I mean, we've seen other people kind of bring up similar kind of comparisons in the past, where people do kind of tend to liken it to Scientology at times. And yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, Lumon in and of itself, it's not running itself like your average business or corporation. It does kind of lean a little bit more into this religious cult-like mentality at times, where the bosses and the former CEOs are all deified in a sense. So no, I could totally see that there could be a lot of similarities between those two. Definitely. And thank you again so much, Robert, for the $20 super chat. Wow, thank you so much, my friend. Amagrad says for $1.99, show needs more boobs. Okay, show needs more boobs. I mean, if boobs is what you want, there's nothing wrong with asking for boobs. I suppose there's nothing wrong with that. And thank you
We
so much
did get
for
like 2 sex scenes, so
you
there's
did.
something for you.
Yeah, there's
The
something. There's a
Elena,
little
I
bit.
guess, yeah. So
Yeah, we yeah. We get a little bit. You might, I don't know if we'll ever get a full on boob scene in Severance. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's that kind of show, but who knows? Who knows where they'll go with this crazy wild story? One thing I will say, after watching season 1 of Severance, I definitely never envisioned them diving into all of these topics that they're diving into in season 2. Like season 1 was like a lot more innocent. It was a lot more kind of I know Dan Erickson describes season 1 as the innies' childhood years, where now he's describing season 2 as them kind of discovering their adolescence and growing up a little bit. And I think that's why we see the change in tone from season 1 to season 2, where we are diving into some darker things in season 2. We are diving into some real world problems that everybody faces on a day to day basis. So you can see how the show has grown up from season 1 to season 2, not just our characters, but the actual show itself and the structure of it. So yeah, a lot of crazy stuff happening in season 2. A lot of crazy stuff. We got Jackson again for another $4.99. Thank you so much, Jackson, again. Very much appreciate you. The shot of Mark and Gemma looking at each other through time, realizing they would never see the other again, was gorgeous. Otherworldly cinematography. Yes, my friend, I am so glad you brought that up because I had to make sure to grab a screenshot of that shot because that was one of my favorite shots in the entire episode. We see this beautiful transition, this beautiful blend from Mark staring out the window in just complete and utter dread, knowing what these officers are about to say, knowing the news that he is about to get. And you can just tell, you can see the look on his face. He knows that these officers are here to tell him something happened to his wife. So you see just that look of dread on his face and how they slowly transition from one to the other, with Gemma kind of having that very same look of dread in her face, because this is right after her failed escape attempt. So at this point, Gemma herself is also feeling so defeated, so demoralized, so kind of just staring the future in the face, knowing that she'll probably never get to see Mark again. And we see the two of them kind of converge here for a split second on screen. This was one of the best shots in the whole episode, for sure. For sure. Love this shot.
I completely agree, Jackson. And it's so sad too because the only thing that she says as she's like going back into the elevator and just collapsing is Mark. She just keeps saying his name.
Yeah.
And it made me really sad for her. But also then I immediately started thinking about the fact that he keeps her ashes, or what he believes are her ashes, in the basement. So I felt super bad for her, but not as bad for him.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, for sure. I mean, this was one of those episodes that it does give you a gut punch or two. And that's why I have been enjoying what Severance has been doing in season 2. They're diving into a little bit more of these more realistic topics that do happen to people on a day-to-day basis in their everyday life. People unfortunately do go through traumas and experiences like this. And again, I know I've heard a lot of people in the chat say all year that they very much appreciate that Severance is taking some of these topics and some of these um, ideas and situations very seriously. And they do. It definitely translates very well on screen. You can tell Severance is handling these things with care, but they also want to show you the truth. They don't want to sugarcoat it for you. And that I very much appreciate. And I think your example of the miscarriage scene is probably the perfect example of that on the entire series, where yes, it's a tragic and horrific thing, but they showcase it in a very real and honest way that you can kind of connect with on a deeper level. And they're doing very well with these kind of topics, I feel. Very
Oh,
good.
they're doing an amazing job. They're doing an amazing job. And I think it makes me think of what you kept telling us, right? You kept telling us that there will be an evolution, that the show was going to change. Season 1 was their childhood. This is them growing up. but they're
Yeah.
tackling really serious topics. I mean, we were talking about consent last week, and now we're talking about miscarriages, infertility. So these are very serious topics, but they have done it in a way where it's not super shocking. It's it fits the plot.
Yes, and that's what's good about it. They're not just diving into these topics just to be profound. And some shows will do that every once in a while. They'll dive into like a very serious topic solely for the purpose of getting a shock value response from the audience, while not really taking the time to show that situation or that tragedy the proper respect it needs and the proper care that it needs. Sometimes shows are just looking for shock value. And that's one thing I'm glad Severance hasn't kind of fallen prey into that method where they're not just looking for shock value. When they show us these deeper, kind of more serious scenes, it's almost like they're trying to impart a lesson, like a serious lesson onto us as the audience. And I know that a lot of people have appreciated them handling these scenes a little bit more serious, that are more realistic, as opposed to just looking for that shock value. So I agree there. They're killing it. They really are killing it. We got Robert Saunders for another 10. Thank you so much, Robert. Further, Hubbard in his book, Dianetics, divides the consciousness into the analytical mind and subconscious reactive mind, which could represent the innie and outie. Ooh, that's interesting, Robert. I did not know that. Again, I'm not very well versed on L. Ron Hubbard, but yeah, Dianetics and the analytical mind and the reactive mind, that does seem a little similar to maybe the Severance program, where you do have the innie and the outie, that are two totally different personalities that are utilizing two totally different parts of their brain. So no, that's an interesting connection. I did not know that about Mr. L. Ron Hubbard. He fancied himself
Definitely,
a
Robert.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes me think now that Robert mentions this. Not only does he do that, but what we know about Scientology, if you ever see any of their buildings, is that they are very sleek and they do look almost like a corporate office, very wealthy. And so they are able to afford beautiful construction, but it looks
Ah,
like a corporate office. If you have ever seen a Church of Scientology, it doesn't look like a church. It looks like a corporate office. So
ah.
allegedly.
Allegedly, we must say allegedly. No, that's interesting. That is interesting. Yeah, so maybe they do share a lot more in common than is just on the surface. I mean, the surface, they seem to share some in common, but even a little bit deeper when you look kind of at both organizations, yeah, you can kind of see some of these similarities pop up. So that's, yeah, super interesting, Robert. Super interesting. And thank you again, my friend, for the 10. Very much appreciate you. We got King in the chat. What is up, King? Great show. Dylan and his Outie wife, though. I want to see more of that in the future, in a future episode. I know there is something to this. It might make him turn. Yeah, the whole Dylan, Innie, and Outie thing, and what's going on with him meeting his Outie's wife, and them kind of slowly developing real feelings for each other. I get the feeling, as sweet as it is to see Innie Dylan happy and see him kind of really want this life, and as innocent as their connection starts, I get the feeling it's going to get to a dark place between those two, just considering these circumstances where we're already seeing Dylan's wife already lying to Dylan, Outie Dylan anyway, and telling him
Mhm.
that she didn't even see him. She didn't even see any Dylan, that he was busy.
Yeah.
So they're already beginning to lie to each other. And once that starts, it is all downhill from there. So while it started off super nice and sweet and innocent and cute at the beginning, I get the feeling Innie Dylan and his Outie's wife, I do think, I hope not, but I get the feeling they're heading for some tough times in the future. What about you, PM? Where do you see Dylan, his relationship with his Outie's wife? Where do you see that progressing to? Do you think they will have a happy ending?
Unfortunately, I don't see how they could have a happy ending. Would
Hmm.
it be making Dylan a permanent innie because that's the best version of him, and that's the version
Hmm.
that the wife kind of seems to prefer?
Yeah.
I don't think that they could do that, right? Or that they will do that for him or let him out of the office. So I think it's going to end in heartbreak, as many other of the other love stories that we have seen in the show will probably end in heartbreak. He's getting way too attached to her, asking for a hug, and now I worry because what we know about Lumen is that as a corporation, they're not really looking out for the innies. They're letting them do a lot of things that
Mhm.
are not appropriate for the workplace. So we saw the hug, we saw the kiss, and now I'm concerned that more will happen between them because Lumen just doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, I mean, Lumen does tend to treat their, does tend to treat people like livestock in a sense, where they're employees and they're built to serve a single function. And yeah, you get the sense that Lumen doesn't really look at their employees as humans; they're just assets. And yeah, I mean, again, as much as I want to be hopeful for Annie Dillon and Outie Dillon's wife, I agree with you. I do think it's one of those situations where how could it end well? It just can't. What, like you said, what are you going to do? Make Outie Dillon permanently any? What happens to the Outie then? You just essentially kill him in a sense because it is essentially death if you never get to switch back over to your Outie and you're your innie for the rest of your life. Then your Outie life is essentially over at that point. It is a form of death, or at least the characters kind of look at that as a form of death. So yeah, it's one of those situations where I don't see how this relationship could end well. I think it's going to end bad. I think it's going to end bad for both Dylan and Dylan's wife. It's Gretchen is her name. Yeah, tough one. Very tough one. But thank you again so much, Kings, for the 5. Very much appreciate the question, my friend. We also got Jackson Perez for another $4.99. Thank you so much, Jackson. The doctor who told Gemma that Mark remarried needs the Mark Wick treatment. The fact that he told her he had a daughter too, what a dick. And yes, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the maybe TV and film's creepiest dentist of all time. Even though he's not really just a dentist, he's more of a lumen doctor. I kind of always call him just the creepy dentist just because it's just became easier. But I must say, in terms of acting performance, this guy did a phenomenal job in this episode. Like, I really hated him. I did not like this guy at every turn. I found myself hating this guy more and more and more for all the evil shit he was doing to Gemma. Not just the evil stuff that he was doing on Lumen's behalf, but he took it one step further and he made this a personal obsession between him and Gemma, where to the point even Drummond had to tell him, hey, you're going to have to give her up at some point. Like, he was becoming so obsessed with Gemma in the most unhealthy of ways. But I got to hand it to the actor. He did such a phenomenal job portraying this villainous character. Whenever an actor can invoke this kind of an emotional response from the audience, that tells you they're doing their job and they're doing it well. And a lot of other roles kind of come to mind in that regard, whether it's Joffrey from Game of Thrones. Everybody hated Joffrey so much,
Yeah.
and rightfully so. He was a little shit. But it is a really strong testament to the actor's ability to dive into a villainous role like this, where they do kind of invoke that feeling in you. And again, that tells me he did a phenomenal job in this role. But man, this creepy dentist, I mean, what was your first reaction to the creepy dentist, PM? And let us know in the chat what you guys think of the creepy dentist.
I immediately knew something was off. Just, I think sometimes you could see someone and you could tell there's something that's not procedure here. And that's the feeling that I got. Like, there's procedure and he's going beyond it. Um, what Jackson mentioned specifically, him telling Gemma, he didn't just say Mark remarried and now has a daughter, which is super painful because that's exactly what she wanted. But he then goes a step further and says, maybe you have felt things in one of those rooms that are stronger than what you have felt for Mark. Maybe I've seen it, which immediately it worried me because it made me think, what is going on to Gemma behind closed doors? What is he doing? Why would he say that he has seen her feel things for that are stronger or better than she felt with Mark. I worry for her and for what he's doing to her. And also, when it comes to Mark remarrying, it brought to me the question, okay, so does Gemma think that she's dead? Because in order to remarry, you need to be divorced. So if Gemma thought that she was alive, she would say, like, no way, he hasn't divorced me, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I'm kind of wondering, did they tell Gemma you died and we just brought you back to life and we're helping you through this so that you could go back and see Mark? Because how can you remarry without having first divorced? And Gemma would have to be privy to that information, would have to sign paperwork. So that kind of confused me. But also, like you and I were talking, Jeremy, they do have footage of Mark um engaging
Ah,
and like and engaging in sexual activity with Hallie and
mm,
Elena. So if they wanted to show Gemma the video, they could say, this is proof. He's moved on. He has a new
yeah,
wife, that
yeah.
being Hallie or Elena.
Very true. I mean, it was such a dirty manipulation hearing him say that to Gemma, because you know that this is definitely this is a tactic that was probably most likely not Lumen approved, and it's just this sick man's obsession with Gemma getting deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where he's trying to elicit this another emotional response in her. And yeah, like you mentioned, this is a lie that they could easily continue. And this is a lie they could easily probably convince Gemma is the truth. All they got to do is, like you mentioned, get a little bit of footage of Mark and Helly knocking boots. And you show that to Gemma, I imagine she is going to believe this story. She is going to believe that Mark did move on, that he maybe did have a child with somebody else. And that is going to break her. If the way I see Gemma right now, I feel like she's in such a frayed state. Her nerves are frayed. She's been severed 6 ways from Sunday. She seems to be holding on by a thread. And I think that one thread that she is holding on to is the idea that maybe when I'm done with this, I will finally get to see Mark again. But if she does find out, or if she does get it in her head that Mark has moved on, that this person is telling her the truth, that Mark is having a daughter with somebody else, I could totally see that being the kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back, in a sense, where that is the last straw that really sends Gemma completely to rock bottom, to the point where she maybe can never be recovered again. I feel like she's barely holding on, and the only thing she's holding on for is Mark. But that could kill her. That could completely destroy her if
Mhm.
she finds out that that is potentially true. Super creepy. Super creepy. Ugh, yeah. It's super creepy, doctor. Super creepy.
Mhm.
And I also saw someone bring up in the chat, yeah, this Danny says, yeah, when he said, I said, I love you, it was so cringe. I even cringed when Gemma said it later. And that was an interesting parallel, I thought, because we see exactly that happen later on in Gemma and Mark's relationship, when they are starting to become a little bit more strained, when their marriage is starting to fall apart a little bit more, and they are becoming more distant to one another. We see this scene perfectly paralleled with this creep saying, I said, I love you, and him kind of forcing Gemma to say it back, even though she clearly did not want to. And then, yes, we see it also mirrored again a little bit later on when Gemma and Mark are in that very same situation, which is very interesting because Gemma has to kind of prompt Mark to say, I love you back in this scene, which just so happens to be the very last time they ever see each other. After this happens, Gemma, of course, walks out the door to her charades night, and she never returns. So the last thing Gemma and Mark said to each other was Gemma trying to re-prompt Mark just so he would remember to say, I love you back to her, which does give you a sense as to how strained their relationship does eventually become.
Yeah,
Super
not
dope.
only that, but w- he's talking specifically about the Christmas card scene, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you and I were talking about the fact that we do get a flashback where Mark specifically mentions, and everything is put there for a reason, right? But he
Hmm.
specifically mentions you hate writing Christmas cards. So it immediately makes me think that Gemma was filling out questionnaires with things that she hated, that made her unhappy, things that made her happy. And they used these questionnaires to build the rooms, because this is so specific. A room where it's Christmas and you're writing endless thank you cards. Some people wouldn't mind it, right? But if she specifically hates writing thank you cards, then that would be a room that would bring out anger. It makes
Yep.
me think that they asked her in one of these questionnaires to basically build her own torture room.
Ah, man. And I think you're 100% spot on. Because, like you said, we see that questionnaire at the beginning of the episode where the other kind of nurse, the other doctor that's down there on the testing room floor is asking Gemma these personal questions. And I think you're right. I do think those questions were asked to specifically tailor make each and every one of these rooms. So anytime Gemma steps into one of these rooms, she's experiencing something that they already know is an uncomfortable situation for her. They're kind of playing on her fears, putting her in these situations, knowing these are situations she does not want to be in. Whether it's her fear of flying, and we see her in the plane crash, whether it's her not wanting to write Christmas cards, and we see her writing endless Christmas cards. Yes, I think you're 100% right. It seems like these rooms were all completely tailor made just for Gemma's worst fears and things that she would rather never do. And it's sad. It's sad essentially to see that this whole thing was potentially manipulated right from the very beginning, just to lure Mark and Gemma into Lumon, into the Severance program, because maybe they saw them and thought that they were the perfect kind of couple for this program. And I think we see a pretty clear indication of that earlier in the episode when we see ding, 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 the creepy freaking dentist himself. Now, this, of course, is when Gemma and Mark, long before the car accident, long before Gemma ever gets taken by Lumon, we see that they were having fertility problems. Of course, Gemma had that horrible miscarriage, but then they continued to try and conceive for a little while after that. And we see them visiting this fertility clinic, and who do they walk right by in the fertility clinic? The creepy freaking doctor dentist dude. Creepy dude right there walking by them, which led me to believe that maybe this is something that Lumon was planning for a lot longer than we originally realized. Maybe this was Lumon kind of surveilling Mark and Gemma for a very long time to see if they were right for the Cold Harbor program. And maybe once they saw that this couple would fit the program in an idealistic way in terms of the connection they have to one another, but also all of the baggage that is between the two of them as well. Maybe they needed that perfect blend of love and damage and that emotional connection between husband and wife for the Cold Harbor program to fully work. And maybe that's why Lumon, and maybe that's why Mark, is so important to Lumon, because Mark is literally the only one who can complete the Cold Harbor file, because he's the only one that has that established emotional connection to Gemma and her to him. So yeah, when I saw this, I just thought, wow, is this something that Lumon has been planning for way longer than we originally anticipated even? And if that's the case, did Lumon potentially even set up the car accident just to get their hands on Gemma and just to hopefully lure Mark into Lumon as well? Like, could they have orchestrated this entire thing, you think?
I mean, I think that you're right on. I think that I like the theory and it makes sense, because this picture here, we see him focusing so much on Gemma. He immediately sees her come in and he's focused in on her.
Yep.
So it makes perfect sense to me. Also, the questionnaire, right? That came from the fertility clinic. Therefore, they had to be
Oh,
researching
geez.
couples and looking for the perfect couple, right? So she was answering all of the questionnaires for the clinic. That's how she got picked. I think
Yeah.
that that theory makes perfect sense. Now, the chat is mentioning something that I didn't notice, the chat that knows all, right? Jeremy's chat.
Yeah.
They are saying that in this scene, she is filling out the paperwork with her right hand. However, in the Christmas card scene, she is writing with her left hand.
Ah. Interesting. Very interesting. I did not notice that. And again, another point to the awesome chat who always tends to notice things even when we don't. No, that's a very interesting detail that I did not catch on my first go around or even my second. And I was super surprised when I saw this dude here, and it definitely led me down that whole rabbit hole in terms of that Lumen has been maybe planning this thing from the very beginning. And Quan Solar even brings up that maybe Lumen caused the miscarriage. I mean, that's incredibly dark to think that they would even go so far as to cause the miscarriage, to create that damage and that baggage in the relationship to make them that much more fitting for this Cold Harbor program. That's incredibly dark, but I suppose it is possible. I mean, Lumen definitely doesn't seem like they have it doesn't seem like there's any kind of moral boundaries that Lumen won't cross to get their desired results. So if they had to do something that dark to get what they want, I don't think they would hesitate in a second. I mean, Lumen is very evil at the end of the day. And I didn't even know this. I totally forgot about this. Actually, I should say is that yes, the blood drive was sponsored by Lumen to ensure their genetics were right, and that's a very interesting point. If Lumen was setting up this entire blood donation drive for the very beginning, maybe that's exactly what it was. They were looking for people who had the right, correct genetic markers. So they could find that perfect couple that had that perfect connection and that perfect mix of genes and baggage and everything they need to fully work out this Cold Harbor case file, this Cold Harbor operation in a sense. So no, I could totally see that being the case, that they have been setting this up right from the very beginning. And Mark and Gemma came across their board and they just saw, okay, this is the best possible chance we have of getting this right. This couple fits the bill better than anybody else. I think that could totally be a thing. Absolutely. Or even maybe Lumen secretly gathered info or spied on her to collect information. Not sure how, but they are not to be underestimated. Absolutely, absolutely, Astrolight. And I think that could be something pretty easy for Lumen to accomplish. I mean, we know that they have contacts everywhere. They have contacts in the morgue, so they could easily fake Gemma's death. I do get the feeling that Lumen probably caused her car accident in the beginning just so they could get her to the severed floor and just so they could hopefully lure Mark into a severed job. It'd be very interesting to see if there are any specific details that we learn in a flashback later on that show us that Lumen specifically lured Mark to Severance, which I do get the feeling they did. Yeah, I mean, it just looks like they have been planning this whole thing for way longer than we originally anticipated. Now that we have all of this new information that this episode did reveal, so very good point, guys. Very good point. Maybe Cold Harbor is where you go to be frozen at the bottom of the lake because he keeps whistling the wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald. Yeah, the wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald has been very interesting, and we did hear it in that previous episode. But as you mentioned, we also hear it in this episode as well. And a lot of people think that is a direct reference to Lake Superior, and Lake Superior being the lake that is maybe that Kier is maybe looking at in the Kier painting that is so famous. Kier drinks drink of Kier's water, and yeah, I mean maybe Cold Harbor is referring to that. Never know. After I watched the last episode, I had so much more of an understanding and wanted to talk to you guys about it. LOL, Diceman. Well, thank you so much for joining us, my friend. Very much appreciate that. Yeah, we love diving into this. We love diving into these episodes and just seeing all the craziness that kind of comes week after week after week. And it's been fun. It's been super fun to see where this story is going. And I do feel like this episode in particular, it did give us a lot of information that we previously didn't have, whether it's seeing the testing room floor for the first time, whether it's finally seeing everything that Gemma has been going through, or whether it's seeing this, just how long that they have been planning this thing to begin with. This episode definitely had the feeling of peeking behind the curtain a little bit. We finally got to see a little glimpse behind the curtain. We've got to see a little glimpse of the puppet master, as it were, for sure. For sure. Good stuff, guys. Good stuff. Oh, and they asked her about drowning. That's right. They did ask her about drowning as well. When we asked her about the accident, they asked her, which would you fear more, suffocating or drowning? And she does say drowning. And man, yeah, it seems like they're, Lumen's been crossing their T's and dotting their I's and setting this up for a very long time, it feels like. Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. I think Nurse Ratched asking about the drowning is a foreshadowing of Cold Harbor. Ooh, interesting. Very well could be. Very well could be indeed. Yeah, absolutely. That's why the handwriting is so poor. Note the yoga pose that Gemma is doing is the same as the one on the Bardo card. Ooh, that's right. Yeah, it is. It is that same silhouette. It's got the same kind of silhouette essentially as well. And we see them talking a little bit about the Bardo card a little bit later on in the episode when we see one of Mark and Gemma's flashbacks in terms of Chikhai Bardo being the fourth of 6 stages of Bardo, where in that stage you kind of sever and kill off your previous self to make room for your next self, which is essentially what Gemma is going through. Essentially, I mean, they're essentially severing Gemma into all of these different personalities, all of these different parts, in the hopes of transitioning her from Gemma to ultimately Miss Casey. And I do think that might potentially be what happens when Cold Harbor does reach 100%, that Gemma will be officially gone and Miss Casey will be the only thing that remains. One death to make room for a new life, essentially Chikhai Bardo. So that's a very good point. Very, very good point. Let's see.
Yeah, and
Else.
on the yoga,
Mm,
sorry,
no, please.
specifically about the yoga, because you mentioned this to me and I thought it was really interesting. Um, if you meditate, right? And so we see her doing yoga, and usually, that could lead to meditation. If she was into
Yep.
meditation, it's a way for her to hold on to Gemma while she's going through all of these traumatic experiences. It's a way for her to keep a little bit of control, right? We know that people under meditation can go through extreme pain or suffering, right? And if they are able to go into meditation, they can transcend that. So it makes me think, could she potentially be remembering everything, just telling them, no, I don't remember what happens in the rooms, but she in reality remembers everything and is just trying to get through to finish the program so that she could get to Mark? Because we see her having reactions to different outfits, letting us know there's something there. She recalls something. But yet she always answers with, no, I don't remember, or I didn't feel a thing, right? So I'm
Mhm.
thinking, and she does seem like the person that would meditate, so potentially.
Mhm. She does. I wouldn't be too surprised at all if we found out later on that Gemma was someone who did meditate. Like you said, we see her doing her yoga, her calisthenics, and everything. And yes, meditation is a big part of completing the full 6 stages of Bardo. So one can ultimately, it's ultimately the journey from the beginning of one's life to their ultimate death and reincarnation, their rebirth in a sense. These 6 stages of Bardo eventually ends in a rebirth. It's a reincarnation cycle, essentially. And that is pretty much what we're seeing happen to Gemma. We're experiencing her death, whether it's the fake death that Lumon put her through with the car accident, her kind of next rebirth as Miss Casey, which could potentially happen when she reaches 100% of Cold Harbor. The 6 stages of Bardo do kind of perfectly fit Gemma's storyline and everything that she's going through, in a sense. So I like that. Her potentially being very good at meditation might even help her gain a certain enlightenment, a certain awareness through one reincarnation, through one life to another, because that is ultimately what you can achieve if you are in a deep enough meditative state. If you are in that kind of enlightened state, you can reach ultimately kind of awareness in a sense when you are crossing over from one incarnation to the next reincarnation, essentially. And maybe that is something we'll see happen to Gemma. Maybe we'll think that Gemma is completely gone, only to find out that a small piece of her held on for dear life because she did have that inner awareness and that inner enlightenment. Maybe I could totally see that being possible. Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, great stuff, guys. Absolutely great stuff. Chat has been just absolutely killing it tonight. Killing it. I wonder if severed are a hive mind eventually, like they could be interchangeable eventually. I don't know. Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, like you brought up, PM, if there is a possibility that she is remembering from one Gemma to the other, then yes, there could potentially be a possibility where it is more of a hive mind thing, where maybe they're not just all completely separate individuals and separate personalities. Again, they're all Gemma. It's multiple different versions of Gemma, but it seems like Lumen is trying to test that severance barrier, see what transcends that severance barrier from one personality to the other. What do they remember? What feelings do they kind of carry over? Pain, emotion, all of the above. But maybe if Gemma is truly already starting to remember room to room and she's just keeping it to herself, she might already be well on her way to that enlightenment period, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great stuff,
Yeah,
guys.
I like that, Peach. I like the idea of interchangeable because that
Mhm.
would give somebody the power, right? To just change your view, or if you're not acting the way that they want you to act, maybe like the senator's wife, they could just sever you into a more appealing version of yourself. So I like that idea. Very good, Peach.
I do like that. I do like that idea a lot. And I part of me wouldn't even be surprised if all of this Cold Harbor operation, everything they're putting Gemma through, why they need Mark's, why Mark's so important because he's the only one that can complete it. This could all be in one giant attempt to eventually sell the Severance program to a general, more wider audience out there. Where I saw someone bringing up where, say it's one of those things where you're going in for a very bad dentist procedure and you don't want to experience the pain. Severance. Lumen can offer a severance program where a severed version of you goes in, gets the work done, and then you switch back over and you're none the wiser. You don't have to experience all of the pain and suffering that goes through the procedure. Very similar to like what you just mentioned with the birth, where this could potentially be something that they end up streamlining to the main public and offering this as a service to the public, where you can get a partial severance, you can get partially severed just to complete a certain topic, a certain aspect, or whatever it is they need to go through, a surgery, a birth, anything like that. So I thought that was an interesting idea, that all of this is an attempt for them to kind of streamline and mainline the severance program. That way it's used for more than just their own employees. Because I imagine a company like Lumen and a technology that is as advanced as Severance, I mean, there's no way the end game is just so they can create the perfect worker. I mean, yes, I do believe that is part of it. They definitely want to create the perfect employee. But we heard James Eagan at the end of season 1 specifically say that the ultimate goal is to get everybody on the planet chipped. He literally says that every single person on the planet to be a child of Kier. And this could potentially be a way to streamline the severed program where the general audience, the general public, does feel a little better kind of having the procedure done. That way it's not just a work thing where it does become just available to the general public for anything they need. I could totally see that being where this is going because, again, James is very insistent that he wants every human on the planet chipped and severed.
Oh yeah,
So,
and I do recall that. I thought it was an amazing theory. It was also on the Discord, and it was by Pam Jam, one of my favorite Sevis, Pam Jam. When she saw the tools for dentistry, she came up with the theory that potentially it's just selling everyone the ability instead of anesthesia, it would be severance.
yeah.
So let's say that you go into the doctor and you're about to have a medical procedure, they would offer you anesthesia or severance where you can have this severed self that just suffers anything that you don't want to suffer, any surgery you don't want to go through, any traumatic event that you don't want to be a part of, right? And
Mhm.
so when she came up with that theory, I thought that it was really interesting. And I could totally see that. I could see in Kier's world going into a doctor's office and being offered severance or anesthesia. Um, and that's what tends to happen when it comes to technology. We see it in our world. When a company builds technology, it's not long after that that people want to have that technology in their home, which is why
Yeah.
we have smart homes and
Mhm.
we keep getting things that are home based that have more technology that a company that makes more sense for a company to have. But we want it. We want it for ourselves. We want it for our home, right?
Yeah.
So I could totally see that. Yeah.
Totally. I could totally see that. And that would fit the bill for a company like Lumen, where they're not going to use this incredibly advanced technology only to create employees in their own building. They're going to want to find a way where they can sell this in many different packages, in many different capacities. So, no, I think that's a great idea, Pam Jam. I think that definitely fits, where even something just as simple as a dentist procedure, like you mentioned, PM, you get the choice. Do you want the anesthesia or do you want the severance? Which should you rather go for? Yeah, I could totally see them. I could totally see that being the end goal, where Lumen ultimately wants to offer this to the general public in multiple different areas, in multiple different aspects of life, and many different procedures. Could totally see that being the case. Absolutely. James Buckley asks, if you kill an innie, does the Outie die? That's an interesting concept. I don't think the Outie dies if the innie dies. It seems like they did shut off Irving. Innie Irving seems to be gone now. I know there's been a lot of debate in the fandom as to whether or not Innie Irving does still exist somewhere, and if they wanted to, they could potentially switch Irving back to his innie. And I know some people tend to believe that Innie Irving is already gone, that his persona, everything has already been wiped and erased. And if that is the case, it looks like Outie Irving is still very much functioning. I guess I would wonder the opposite direction. If the Outie gets killed, I mean, it seems like that is going to kill the innie. Essentially, the innie is tied to the Outie in a sense, where if you kill the Outie, the innie is going to die along with it. But if you kill the innie, if you switch innie to Outie and essentially kill off the innie while you're in Outie form, then I could totally see that the Outie could be able to survive. And now you're just you from now on, which is maybe potentially what happened to Irving. A lot of people seem to think that Innie Irving is already completely gone. I hope he's not. I do want to see Innie Irving again, but I mean, there's a chance. There is a chance that Innie Irving could potentially be gone, for sure. For sure. R.I.P. to Irving, by the way. Always going to miss him.
Yeah, I
That
don't
opening
accept that
scene.
still.
I know. You think we'll see him again at some point?
No, no, I don't. You guys convinced me the other day when the chat said it's probably a no, and you said it's probably a no. But I don't know, in my heart, I just can't accept it.
I know. I'm trying to hold on to the slightest little bit of hope that maybe we will see Innie Irving again at one point. Because I know you and I, in particular, we really did like the storyline of Innie and of Innie Irving and Innie Burt. They had a really good storyline in season one. They had a really good connection. It was one of the most genuine connections we've seen on the show up until this point. And to see their journey, their story end in the kind of tragic way that it did, it was a little bit disappointing. That so I did kind of always hold on to maybe a little bit of hope that at some point we will see Innie Irving again,
Mhm.
but it is a little unlikely. But who knows? I'm trying to hold on to hope. Like you, I haven't fully accepted it yet. I'm going through the 12 stages of grief, just like Helly did in episode 5. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully we see him again. Hopefully we see good old Innie Irving again. We got Jackson for another $4.99. Thank you so much, my friend. That opening scene of season 1 of Mark bawling in his car really hits now. Yeah, it's actually, yeah, I mean, that is something we see super early on at the very beginning of season 1. We see Outie Mark kind of always crying in his car every single morning before he goes into the Severance office and switches from Outie to Innie. At that point, the pain and the grief of losing Gemma was just so much that every single morning he needed to kind of just cry and let it all out before he even went into work. And now we're seeing a little bit more as to why. As you mentioned, we're finally getting that full backstory as to what really happened to Gemma and Mark. And it's tragic. It's super tragic. They started off as the almost the perfect couple in the way they started. Although you could kind of see little things right from the very beginning, as like you mentioned, in terms of how Mark asked for her name. Who are you, by the way? Not the best tactic. I wouldn't suggest that tactic to anybody. But yeah, we do see them go from this kind of sweet couple that genuinely seem to be in love to slowly but surely getting more and more strained in their marriage, to the point where It was inevitably, ultimately going to break them. And I think you brought up a very good metaphor for Mark and Gemma's relationship. We actually get to see all of these flashbacks. And during these flashbacks, we are starting to see Mark and Gemma's relationship literally fall apart, fall to pieces in front of us, which was the perfect metaphor, as you mentioned, for Mark trying to put the cradle together and it literally falling to pieces in front of him. The perfect metaphor for their relationship. That was so good on your part.
Oh yeah, I found it really heartbreaking, really, because making the purchase, right? Making the purchase of a crib lets you know that you have such hope that this will come to fruition.
Yeah.
And him building this crib as they're going through the IVF process and they're having miscarriages, um, and Gemma kind of like running away from the noise because the noise is so loud as he's trying to build it, to put it together, to make this happen. Not only the crib, but really their relationship, their marriage, a child, a family. Um, and he just can't get it right. It doesn't work. And we see him just completely give up because he can't figure it out. And that kind of seems like what their relationship was starting to become. It was starting to become the process of trying to become a family, and they just couldn't do it. It just wasn't happening. Then we see a scene of Christmas with Mark and Gemma, the real Mark and Gemma, and
Mhm.
Gemma's like kind of like laying down on the couch with her head against Mark's lap, and there's a Christmas tree, but it's such like sadness, right? And it really
Mhm.
makes you think they're trying so hard for this child that should be there. If it had worked out, this child opening maybe like Christmas presents, but instead it's just them and their solitude and their loneliness and their heartbreak. Yeah.
That is a really good point. That is a good point. You kind of see, what it is and what could have been. Like you said, the idea of this perfect Christmas with them and their child opening up gifts, and you see the reality is much darker than that. It's a future that unfortunately they just never managed to capture because they had all of this trouble conceiving. So no, that's a very good point. Very good point. I love the metaphor of the cradle falling apart, just perfectly mirroring their relationship falling apart at the same time. That was a very apt on your part. Very good. Yeah, and this is what I love about Severance. They throw in some of these parallels. They throw in some of these kind of these little things that you pick up on. Usually, whenever you watch this show, you do kind of benefit from watching each episode maybe 2 or even 3 times, because that is when you will start to pick up on a lot more of these things that maybe you missed the first go around, where you will see these very interesting parallels and some of the cleverest metaphors I have ever seen in a TV series. They're really good at that. That's one thing Severance is really, really good at, kind of connecting the dots every once in a while between two things that might seem unconnected, but they end up being more deeply connected than we originally thought sometimes. Great stuff. Great stuff. We got Chris Tan, unpronounceable, for another $10. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate that, my friend. Severance is like partitioning your brain with different drive letters, C, D, H. It essentially is. It is essentially like that. You are partitioning different parts of your brain into this. And I think we're seeing that happen to Gemma tenfold, where usually most of the characters we see just have an innie and an outie. But Gemma is being just, again, split over and over and over, severed into all of these multiple different versions of Gemma, while also having an innie in Miss Casey as well. So essentially, Gemma has an innie and multiple outies, although they're not really her outies either, because she never does leave Lumon. She never leaves the Severance floor. So is it even accurate to say that Gemma is the outie and Miss Casey is the innie? Or is it more accurate to say that they're all just different versions of an innie? I guess that's an interesting question. What do you guys think? When you think of Gemma, and you as well, PM, let me know what you think. When you guys think of Gemma and Miss Casey, do you think of it in the sense of Gemma being the outie and Miss Casey being the innie? Or since Gemma's case is a little bit different than your average severed employee and she never gets to leave this place, is it just a bunch of different innies inside Gemma and she doesn't have an outie? Or maybe Gemma Prime is the one outie and the rest of the Gemmas are all innies. I mean, yeah, it's interesting to see how that is perceived. I mean, do you look at Gemma as having an innie and an outie, or do you look at her a little different?
I mean, I would like to say the latter, what you stated, where it's like Prime Gemma is the Audi, and then
Mhm.
she's severed into many innies, different innies, right? One of them being Miss Casey. I don't know how many she has. There was 6 rooms, so Miss Casey, that would be 7, at least 7
Mhm.
that we know of. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. Yeah, I think I kind of look at it that way as well, where the original Gemma, the prime Gemma, um, if any is an Audi, it is her. Even though she is kind of trapped down here, I could potentially look at that as her kind of Audi persona, where Miss Casey and all of these other severed Gemmas are all just multiple different innies. So I could potentially see it like that, but I totally understand people who also only see innies when they look at Gemma as well, because again, she does never leave this place, so that it's that is you know, that wouldn't be a wrong way to state it either. So it's a very good point. Very good point. Yeah, Helly can have any Mark. They can reset him. Let's see what else we got. What did you guys think? Audi Irv may have been shown a picture of the black hole. Yeah, how exactly did Irving know about that in the first place? That was another question that hasn't been fully answered. We saw that Audi Irving has been drawing this kind of this elevator over and over and over again. And part of me wondered at first if that was something that was transcending the severance barrier, or maybe that was something that Innie Irving saw at one point and it's subconsciously being transferred over to Audi Irving. But it seemed like Innie Irving didn't know where that elevator was either. It seemed like that was part of Innie Irving's mission to find this elevator, to find this hallway. So how did he ultimately first get a glimpse of that? How did he first start having visions of it? Why did he first start painting it, I guess, is a good question, James. Very good question. I'm not sure. It's a bunch of innies with one outie, says Mary. Interesting, interesting. Gemma Prime is a prisoner, basically, and she essentially is. Like when I see Prime Gemma, you know, the one in the Star Trek suit, that's Prime Gemma, and yes, she is a prisoner. I mean, can you say that that's an outie or an innie? I suppose you can make arguments for both, but yeah, it's tough. It is tough. Gemma, former Audi, Miss Casey, multiple innies, and I could potentially see that, but it doesn't. Well, it doesn't seem like there's multiple Miss Caseys. It seems like there's only one Miss Casey and multiple different Gemmas. Like every room that she was in down there was a different version of Gemma. So I kind of see Gemma Prime as the Audi, and then her also having a ton of innies, one being Miss Casey and the others being all of these other Gemmas that are inside of her. I think that's kind of the way I look at it, at least. But it's interesting. It is interesting. I think Irv has been through what Gemma has been through with Bert as the creepy doctor. Oof. Oh my God. Oh my God. Imagine that if that's something they reveal at one point, that Bert and Irving have an even deeper history than we even realize. And Bert has the first version of the evil doctor, the creepy dentist. Ah, man, I hope
Hmm.
not. I hope not. I don't want to see that. I do not
I
want to
hope
see that.
not. They're my favorite couple, which now I like Fields. I don't want them to hurt Fields' feelings, but
Yeah,
I hope not. That would be really heartbreaking.
it would be. It would be. And I do, and I totally agree with you. Going into that dinner, I mean, part of me kind of wanted to root for Irving and Bert just because I liked them in season one and how their innies kind of found each other and were just naturally gravitated to each other. But by the time you leave that dinner, Dan Erickson, the creator, he specifically said he wanted the audience to leave that dinner also liking Fields as well. And I think they completely achieved that. It was one of those aspects where I didn't know who to root for after that dinner was over because I genuinely did like the character of Fields too. And of course, I'm always going to like anything that John Noble is in. He is a phenomenal actor. He was great in Lord of the Rings. He was probably even better on Fringe, which was, in my opinion, probably his best role ever. He's had so many roles over the years and had so many big parts in feature films and series, but John Noble as Walter on Fringe was one of the coolest characters I've ever seen in my life. So seeing John Noble join the cast of Severance, I was always going to be a fan of his character, but I liked him even more after the time that dinner was over. Like, you do go away from that dinner genuinely liking Fields as well, and it's hard. It's hard to know who to root for, especially when you see Bert being kind of sleazy towards the end of that episode as he's walking Irving out, and he's totally flirting with him, and even open to seeing him again without his husband. So if anything, I go into that episode really liking Bert, and I kind of leave liking Bert a lot less and liking Fields more, I think.
Yeah. And well, you kind of mentioned this in the predictions video right before the episode, which you amaze me always. But you mentioned you had a screenshot of Bert already flirting with the Irving Outie when he was kind of like pursuing him, and he was making those mysterious phone calls. He was already flirting with him, saying, do you want to ride home? I know where you live. So since the beginning, we kind of have seen that Bert is a flirt. And then when he did that at the ham dinner, because Irving said the three of us, he genuinely had a great time. So he said, the three of us can hang out. And it was Bert who said, or just the two of us. So he's been a flirt. He's been a flirt.
He has. I mean, and that, I guess that is one thing that you can say does kind of carry over and transcends the Severance barrier. No matter if it's any Bert or Outie Bert, he's a flirt. That is Bert. He is the flirt. And even like, I didn't even notice this until you brought it up last time we were talking about them. I had to even go back and rewatch some of their season 1 scenes, and you were 100% right. Every single time they make physical contact, it's always Bert initiating the contact. It's never Irving. So yeah, Bert is the ultimate flirt. Whether it's his innie, his outie, he's just that guy, I guess.
Like the chat says, he's a scoundrel, right? He told us, never lied. He said he's a scoundrel. And I agree, chat. He let us know that is my style. That's who I am.
He did. He did. I mean, I kind of already started to get a little bit of scoundrel vibes from him. Like, as soon as he invited Irving to the ham dinner to begin with, and then he goes so far as to already flirting with him a little bit, telling him, oh, bring expensive red wine. We love red wine. It's like, okay, this is not going to end well. This is not going to be a fun and happy dinner. Something really wrong is going to happen here. But yeah, Bert, man, Bert was the initiator every single time. That's very true.
So now we know that flirtiness, how flirty you are, transcends the Severance barrier.
Yeah. When it comes to Bert, yeah, it completely transcended the barrier. Whether it's every version of Bert likes to flirt, essentially. So yeah, some things do carry over from one to the other. Good stuff, guys. Let's see what else you are saying. Yes, remember the paintings of the innies dating each other, eating each other. Maybe that really happened, and I was reset to another innie version. Oh, okay. The painting of the that we see in season 1, yeah, of them kind of all slaughtering each other and eating each other. What was it? The immolation of optics and design, or something like that. And that was very interesting, and that was one thing I liked about season 1 and how they kind of carried over to season 2, how it seems like Lumon has kind of carefully crafted these weird superstitions and these weird reputations that each one of these departments has. It seems like they don't want the departments to mingle with one another. They don't want the departments to kind of converse and converge with one another. So what is the best way to keep all of these departments separate and to keep them from ever interacting? Well, you start developing a ton of wicked, crazy freaking stories like that, like optics and design getting slaughtered and eaten, like the people at MDR walking around with pouches that have things inside them that jump out and kill people. You start to craft these ridiculous stories because if you're an innie, there's so much you don't know. So I imagine being an innie, it's a lot easier to be fooled with a ridiculous story like that. I mean, you tell a story like that to someone in the outside world that this person has a pouch that carries some kind of some reptilian inside them that jumps out and kills people. Nobody on the outside is ever going to believe that. But the innies, being as gullible as they are, you can get away with a little bit more. Just like Milchick stating, this is the tallest waterfall in the world, even though it was super tiny. So yeah, I guess if that was one way that you wanted to get these departments not to interact with one another, you create these stories. You create this fear mongering essentially at the end of the day. You have each department fear the other so they don't band together, so they don't work together and ultimately work against you as the company. That is the ultimate goal for Lumen, creating the perfect obedient worker. And one thing they don't want in their workers is that spirit to band together and rebel. And what's the best way to combat that? Make sure the departments fear each other. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I remember that you actually talked about this when we were talking about the sheep, right? The
Yep.
goats, about basically them coming together being a company's biggest threat. If you are Lumen, them forming a union, any sort of union, even just talking to each other, that is the biggest threat to a corporation or a company when the employees unionize. And it brings up the phrase divide and conquer. This is how you keep them obedient and you keep them from unionizing. And we saw that actually take place when they tried talking to the goat people, and the goat people were immediately terrified of them.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the first thing Gwendolyn Christie says. Are you here to kill me? Like she's holding up like a knife or scissors or like shears or something. Are you here to kill me? It's like, fuck, no, calm down, Brienne of Tarth. I am not here to kill you. Do not pull out your sword on me. I do not want to get the hound treatment here. Yeah, best way to keep them apart, to keep them from working together, make them fear one another. Just classic, simple and easy mind manipulation right there at work, which is something Lumen seems to be very adept at, these kinds of manipulations for sure. Given that they are using Mark to get to him, to get him to refine Gemma's torture in the testing rooms, even if they get her out, I can see them back together. It's so diabolical. And that's kind of my fear as well, Matt, and where eventually they will finally rescue Gemma or Miss Casey from this place, but there's just going to be too much damage there that they'll never be able to find their way back to each other, or it'll be after Gemma is gone and there's only Miss Casey remaining. I do get the feeling we're heading for a very bittersweet ending here when it comes to Gemma and Mark. I don't think they're going to get that happy ending. I do think this is going to end very tragic for one or even both of them. I don't see it ending well. There's so much that has happened. There's so much that is still happening to Gemma, and we still aren't 100% sure what exactly will happen to Gemma ultimately when Cold Harbor is complete. Will that complete her transformation? Will that erase Gemma entirely? Will only Miss Casey be left? There's so many questions we still don't know. But yeah, I do tend to agree with you. I don't think it's going to end well. I don't think it's going to end well. I think there might just be too much damage between Mark and Gemma to ever kind of get back to. Maybe they can get past it, but will they ever be the couple they were before they went through all of this stuff? I guess is the question. Do you think that there's a chance that Mark and Gemma will have that happy ending?
Well, I always defer to Miss Cobell. There will be no honeymoon ending for you, Mark. Right? If she says it, it must be real. I mean, I guess if we were to be hopeful, right? If we want to be hopeful, we could see how Mark was before all of this happened to him, and perhaps this makes him grateful for Gemma. Perhaps this makes him a better person, right? Not that he was a super bad person. I'm not saying that he was. It just seemed like he wasn't as grateful for Gemma as he could have been. And perhaps this also makes Gemma more grateful to get the opportunity to be with Mark. So I could see them working through it. Definitely, there would be a lot of trauma in between, and she would have to get over the fact that Outie Mark or any Mark slept with Helly, Elena. She would have to get over all of that. And also, it raises the question: is Mark going to be in love with Helly? We don't know
Yeah.
necessarily that he will be in love with Gemma enough to want to be with Gemma. Wouldn't that be tragic that Gemma does and goes through all of this process only to find out that Mark has lost all feelings for her and now wants to be with Helly?
Ah, that's another bittersweet possibility as well. They do eventually get her out, but yeah, how do we know, like, once this reintegration is 100% complete, how is it going to look? What is the full, complete, reintegrated version of Mark going to look like ultimately? Will he have feelings for Gemma? Will he have feelings for Helly? Will he have feelings for both of them? Will one of these loves die out? Yeah, I could potentially see that being a very bittersweet ending where they get her out, but he can never find those feelings for Gemma ever again because the feelings for Helly are just a little too strong. Maybe that's a possibility. I guess it would come down to which love is stronger, I guess. Is Any Mark and Helly's love stronger than Outie Mark and Gemma's love? Which relationship is stronger at the end of the day? I imagine whichever one is stronger is probably going to be the one that lasts. And I think you could make a good argument that Any Mark and Helly's relationship is the stronger and purer of the two. I mean, there's less damage there, even though there is some baggage there. Of course, they seem to move past it and work through it very well, and it only brought them closer in the long run. And the innies have a certain level of freedom that the outies don't have, where they don't come with all of their outies baggage. So I could potentially see Any Mark and Helly's love being a little bit stronger than Gemma and Outie Mark's. I could totally see that being the case.
Yeah, and when it comes, I like that you mentioned that the innocence, because the chat that knows all, Jeremy's chat last week made I think an amazing point. I can't recall who said it, but the chat was talking about it, about Dylan specifically. Dylan Inni gets to be just wonderful with his wife, stare at her, hear about the children, because he hasn't experienced real life. What happens when the Innies experience real life? Yes, their love is innocent and pure, but real life has stress. Real life has ups and downs. And are they going to just become like the Audis? Are they going to become the version of themselves that they already were? Because
Yeah.
the Audi Dylan, he does have to deal with the unpleasant moments for the children, right? Any Dylan, he just gets to hear about the children. So I thought that the chat made an excellent point.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It is again, and this is why the whole Severance program, why all of these questions and topics that the show is diving into is so intriguing because they're approaching all of these things from a very realistic way. Um, it's interesting. Again, I shudder to think how this whole show is going to end. Like, what is the full ending of Severance going to look like? I don't know, but I do get the feeling it's probably going to be along the bittersweet ending, where some of it will be triumphant innies take over and take down Lumon, but I have a feeling it's going to come at an immense cost, where there's going to be a lot of damage left in their wake after Lumon is brought down. If they even bring Lumon down, who knows? Maybe they won't. Maybe they won't. Good stuff. Good stuff. So the idea is they're testing that all her innies can't remember what happens in the rooms, right? Essentially, yes, that is part of what they're doing down there, Kurt Samoa, yes. Because we hear Drummond say this, that they're testing to see what will transcend the severance barrier. So by severing Gemma into all of these multiple different versions of Gemma and putting her into all of these rooms, with each room being a different Gemma, yes, they want to see what carries over from one room to the next. What does she remember from one? What feeling does she remember? Feeling, pain, anything. That is part of what they seem to be doing down here, seeing what will transcend the severance barrier. Exactly. And man, speaking of, one thing we didn't, I did want to also touch on. Speaking of Drummond, we get to see a pretty interesting scene of him in this episode, where we see something very interesting that did remind me a little bit of the shadow twins that we saw in episode 4. Now, I'll play the scene real quick, and then we will talk a little bit about it.
Are the Severance barriers holding?
Yes, the technology is working.
You like her.
She's easy to like. She's fond of me too, of course.
She's fond of me too. Creepy ass dentist. Oh my god! And look how creepy he looks here. I think it was someone brought it up in the chat that they thought this was the creepy dentist's best disguise, their favorite disguise that the creepy dentist wears in this episode. I mean, he's definitely got the high school gym teacher vibe down. The 70s high school gym teacher vibe very down. He's got the whistle and the jump warmer and everything. But yes, we hear them talk a little bit about the severance barrier and is it holding? And they think that it is, which is telling them that the technology is working. And we saw a little reference or heard a reference to this even in season 1, when Milchick and Cobell are observing Miss Casey on the MDR floor. And we hear Milchick specifically say, it's a good thing they don't remember each other. It means the technology is working. So clearly, this has been a big part of the Severance program to see what will and won't transcend the Severance barrier. And we also learn in this episode, in this scene, that our 4 MDR employees are being shadowed in a sense, where they almost have a shadow surveillance counterpart watching watching all of their work, essentially. And if you watch the scene a little bit closely, you start to notice that the one watching Mark resembles Mark a little bit. The one watching Helly resembles Helly a little bit. The one watching Dylan definitely resembles Dylan. And of course, the one that is watching Irving even resembles Irving a little bit. And that totally reminded me of the shadow twins that we saw in episode 4, the twins that we saw guiding our MDR team on their way to Woes Hollow, where they looked kind of like each other, but not exactly like each other. I don't think this is the same thing. Don't get me wrong. I don't think these are shadow twins. It seemed like the shadow twins we saw in episode 4 were a lot more simple. It seemed like they kind of just served a base function just to kind of stand and point, where these seem to be a little bit more like actual people that resemble who they're surveilling very, very similarly. And I thought that was interesting. And what exactly is the point of this? Why do we have MDR being surveilled? Why do we have a counterpart for each one of our MDR refiners? What exactly are they keeping an eye out for, I guess is the question. But it was interesting to see how each one of them kind of slightly, not too closely, but slightly resembles who they're watching. Crazy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And for the job function, I can imagine that it's super important that you look like the person that you're watching. But when you pointed that out, they look exactly. I went back, I looked at it. They looked exactly like the people that they were watching, even down to her hair color being just like Helly's. And I can't even imagine why that would be relevant to the job. It
Yeah.
looks like what they're doing is just going through what the inmates are already working through. So they're not having to do any refinement themselves, more like monitor them. But why is it important that as you monitor, you also look like them?
Yeah, it's exactly that's one thing I couldn't quite understand. Like I could understand Lumen wanting to have surveillance on their MDR employees to keep a close eye on them, especially considering how important the work that they're doing is. But yeah, like why do they go one step further and have each one of their surveillance counterparts look kind of similar to who they're surveilling? Like you said, even down to the Helly one having the exact same color hair as Helly. Yeah, it was weird. It was very weird, but it did definitely remind me a little bit of the Shadow Twins. But I don't think these are Shadow Twins. Obviously, these definitely seem to be like real people. But it was an interesting observation at the very least, for sure. For sure. And yeah, this is so evil. Mark is unwittingly building each hell experience for Gemma. And that's the sad part, isn't it? And that was one thing you and I talked a little bit about a few weeks ago when we were first starting to maybe think that this is what the MDR work is ultimately doing, that Mark is unwittingly refining Gemma's personality, refining what she is going through, actively kind of participating in what horrible experiences she is going through on that testing room floor. And that's going to be very interesting when that gets revealed. And I imagine it will get revealed at some point. At some point, when Mark is fully done reintegrating and he has all of his memories of his innie and his outie, I have to imagine at some point he is going to uncover what the work is that they're doing. That's a huge mystery of the show, and it has been from the very beginning. What exactly is the work? Why is the work so mysterious and important, as they call it? And I do get the feeling that they will find out what they're doing at one point. I mean, they kind of have to, in terms of the way the story is set up and conflict resolution. They have to find out what they're working on eventually. And when they do, yeah, how exactly is Mark going to take that? How is Mark going to come to terms with the fact that he essentially helped erase his wife and helped craft these different individual hells for her? Because as we saw down on the testing room floor, every room that Gemma went into was the room of a previous case file that was previously worked on. So yeah, they have been tailor making this experience for Gemma without even realizing it. And I imagine that's going to have a very hefty toll on Mark when he finds out that he had a hand in destroying his wife, essentially. Do you think that'll ever come out? Do you think Mark will ever find out what he's really doing?
Of course, because just like you stated, it's such a twist, but also it's there. They wouldn't have shown us that all of the rooms have the same file names unless it was going to become important. And I
Yeah.
imagine that if the innies ever go down there, if they're able to sneak down there, they're going to immediately realize that the rooms are the files that they have been staring at for their entire lifetime, right? They've been
Yeah.
working on these files. So they're going to recognize that all of the work that they were doing was basically to torture Gemma. And that brings us back to the question asked previously: how do you move on from that? If in fact you have been participating in the torture of Gemma, your wife, in deleting or erasing, right, her feelings, memories, how do you even move on from that?
Man, I don't know. That's a very good question. How do you deal with something like that? And if we do ever want to see a happy ending between Mark and Gemma, and particularly, how do they ever get past that? Like when Gemma finds out that Mark unwittingly had a hand in crafting this whole experience for her, this hell that she goes through on a daily basis. And then Mark finds out that, holy shit, I have been doing this to my wife the entire time. That might be a step too far. That might be one of those things where they just can't come back from, that they just can't overcome. It's super profound, and it's super sad at the end of the day. And like you said earlier, Matt, it is. It's kind of evil. It's super evil what Lumon is essentially making Mark do to his own wife, essentially. Yeah, super dark. Super, super dark, guys. But again, that's kind of what I've been enjoying about season two. They haven't been afraid to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the darker aspects of life and ask a little bit of the tougher questions and take these questions much more seriously than we do in other series, where again, sometimes we see other shows dive into these topics, but they kind of only do it for shock value and they don't really take the time to give the topic its full and proper respect. But I got to hand it to Severance. They're really tackling these darker real world problems in the most realistic way and the most respectful way possible. And I think that's why so many people have been gravitating towards the show. and some of these darker aspects that they have enjoyed, because we've seen it pop up in our comment section in our chat quite a few times, where people are appreciating the way that they're portraying this. They're appreciating the way that they're portraying this. They're showing respect when they portray this. And yeah, they're handling these situations a lot better than most shows do, I would say, for sure.
Oh, they're doing an amazing job, and they keep
Yeah.
impressing me. We were talking, like I said, about consent, and they did an amazing job at showing Helly and how she processes that, right, and the stages of grief.
Yeah.
And no idea. I thought, okay, that's the biggest hurdle, right? That's super serious, very complex. But then
Yeah.
next episode, they're tackling miscarriage and doing an amazing job at portraying the pain and also portraying it in a respectful manner. So I can't wait to see what they do in the next episode. Is like, what are we going to talk about? Like, what other serious, super serious live event can they put in that episode? um they really are amazing. I love Severance. Yeah.
Mm. No, me too. Like I really do, and that's kind of how I go into each one of these episodes too lately as well. It's like, okay, what are we going to get into this week? What kind of dark and nefarious and mysterious stuff are we going to dive into and unravel? What kind of life experience is this episode going to teach us? Kind of thing. You do kind of head into each one of those each new episode with that feeling. So I do agree with you very much there. Yeah, praise Kier, as Quan Solar would say. Praise Kier indeed. This has been such a phenomenal show. I really have been loving diving into it. It's definitely a much different show than I would usually cover here on the channel. But after I finally caught up on season 1, I totally understood right away why we had received so many requests to cover Severance. Totally understand now. Because it's a very good and unique show. It's well crafted, it's well written, it's well directed. The cinematography is phenomenal. The acting and the cast is great. This show has been meticulously crafted to elicit a very, very specific response and a very specific look. Like, you look at Severance and it even looks different from any other show that you're watching on any other cable network or any other streaming service. Everything about Severance is just a little bit different. It's new, it's fresh, it's giving us a very profound inside look into many real things and sometimes difficult things, and even the whole corporate setting in and of itself. And I know I've been learning a ton about the corporate setting from you ever since this show has started, and to learn all of these similarities, to learn that Severance has really drawn on a lot of real world corporate America aspects that they throw into the show. Yes, they might be a little dramatized every once in a while, but the core and fundamental principle of a lot of the things we see in Severance are things that occur in real world corporate America. So that's one thing I just really enjoy about Severance. They have been taking very interesting inspiration from the real world and carefully crafting this meticulous look that is Severance.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I see it all the time in the chat. The chat will say, This is my life," or "This is what I do 8 hours a day." So they themselves are finding common ground with what they're seeing on screen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that it's powerful and interesting commentary on what America and the corporate world of America has become, where they do create, like the company values. And more often than not, they sound like religious values. They want to be everything. They want to be your best friend. They want to be your family. They want to be your God. It gets to that point. So I'm so thankful in a way that somebody was able to look at office life and corporate life and thought that it was interesting enough to make a show about it, right? Added
Yeah.
dramatization, of course, but you think of an office and you just don't think interesting, right?
hmm And that's the thing. Like they have like I didn't know much about the corporate world before the show started, but the show's taught me a lot. You've given me a lot of really good insights into what it's really like. And yeah, like never in a million years would I have thought that a corporate America structure could be this complicated, this complex, this intriguing, and seeing some of the manipulation that some of these companies actually really do employ with some of these perks, and carefully crafting this mystique around these perks so your employees will do everything they can to get them. It's like, it is such an interesting thing, and it does paint the corporate world in a totally different light now going forward, now that I do have better information on it.
Oh yeah, for
Super
sure.
creepy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
super creepy. And the chat is saying, right? Peach makes an excellent point. Years ago, you had to pretend to bring your whole self to work. And there was a big campaign about, we want you to be yourself in the office. We want you to bring your whole self, and accommodating you. And then it became be professional, and it became training. Don't be offensive, right? And be politically correct. So it's ever changing. But that's an excellent point, Peach.
Yeah, I like that. Bring your whole selves to work. And yeah, and I think that's why Severance is so interesting, just conceptually, like from the very beginning, where we do see a version of Severance in our real world every single day. Most people that do go to work, they go to work every day, and they put on their work face. They put on their work persona. They are a different person at work than they are at home. Everybody just naturally is. I don't think it's anything wrong. I think that's just something that most people naturally do, where we have different masks for different circumstances. And I do think that when people are going to work, they are, again, they're putting on their work face. They'll say things at work that maybe they wouldn't say in their private life. They'll be a little more guarded in work than they will be in their private life, where when you go home, you're putting on your home face, the face that is really kind of your true self. But when you're out there in public, people want to project a certain image about themselves. So in a sense, severance is something that has been very real for very long, where people do have multiple different personalities that they lean on a day-to-day basis.
Of course.
Absolutely.
And like the chat says, it is in fact appropriate, right? That is what the company wants. The company wants you to be the least offensive version of yourself and the most productive,
Yeah. Yeah, that,
just
that
like
is
Lumen.
that is definitely it. Just like Lumen, just like the outside world, just like Lumen here, society in general. Society wants you to be the most productive member of society that you can be. Put your best foot forward, contribute in any way that you can. And yeah, it's something that is super similar from Severance to every single day life. Absolutely. Absolutely. We got Michael Bancroft in the house. What is up, Mike? Good to see you, my friend. I once had a boss tell me that I have to be about her company as much as she was. I thought, okay, then cut me in, cut me in on the profit. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things, isn't it? Where some of these companies, they do want you to be so deeply invested in the company. They want it to be more than a job. They do want it to be a religion in a sense. And that's why I do totally understand all of the kind of similarities that a lot of fans draw between Severance, Lumen, and things like Scientology, things like cults and things like that. Yeah, there is a similar aspect there, where Lumen doesn't want just employees. They want the perfect, most loyal and dedicated employee that they can possibly find, one that worships the company, doesn't just work there. They want you to be just as invested in this company as the people who are collecting that bottom line. So no, that's very, very true, Mike. Very true indeed.
And
And I think it's a
very
good
spooky.
response. Yeah.
Yeah, super spooky. Because sometimes I think in the corporate world, and you guys could tell me in the chat if you do this, or if this is, cubicle life, right? Sometimes you have to go through the process and play your part, but you're looking at the person across from you, and somebody like Mr. Milkshake, and you think to yourself, you can't possibly think these things that you're telling me about how much we love the company and how much we do for the company. Like, and you start to wonder, do they genuinely believe these things? When they say you have to be about the
Yeah.
company as much as I am about the company, it starts to become a really spooky world where you start to question, are you actually that invested in this company? Like, it's not that deep. It's like insurance or, paperwork. It's
Yeah.
not that important. Like, are you telling me that this is that important to you? And sometimes the answer is yes. Like we saw in
Mm.
Lumen, Mr. Milkshake, him stopping Gemma lets me know that this job is super important to him, to the point where
Yeah.
he's going to do something like that, something that he knows is wrong, that he knows the details about it, and that he's still willing to do that. He's done it twice now that we have seen him walk her into this hallway, and he sees the hesitation and he's willing to do that for the company.
He is, and I know this was definitely a scene that it's for us who do kind of like Milkshake and ultimately want Milkshake to maybe have a redemption arc at some point. This did kind of put him quite a few steps back, and it does paint him in a little bit more of a nefarious light, especially when you consider everything that encompasses this scene. At the very beginning of season 2, we literally hear Milchick say the exact opposite. He tells Mark and the rest of the refiners that I don't want to be your jailer. And then here we are seeing him be exactly that for Gemma. You are literally Gemma and Mrs. Casey's jailer. So that was a very interesting contrast between the two different sides of Milchick, where he doesn't want to be the jailer for his MDR employees, yet he has no problem being the jailer for Gemma, knowing all of the heinous stuff that she is being put through on that severed floor. So, if nothing else, it does kind of showcase that this is a super serious job to Milkshake. He does take this super seriously. He is still very invested in the company, and maybe he's not as close to a redemption arc as we originally thought or hoped, at least. I
I
don't
mean,
know.
he would have to do such a profound thing. Like he would have to rescue
Yeah.
Gemma and then help all of the innies and destroy the company for me to be able to forgive him. Because after seeing everything that Gemma had to go through just to get to that hallway, and being that he got there just in time, he could have just been a little slow, or like he maybe didn't get there on time and helped her in that way. But it broke my heart because it really lets you know that this is hopeless. It doesn't matter if she makes it through the floor and she's able to get to the elevator, it's just never going to matter. She's never going to escape.
Uh, it did put a little bit of a sad damper on it, didn't it? It really did. Because yeah, I guess you do kind of ultimately have to ask that question now. Is there a possibility? I mean, will Gemma ever be able to escape if Milchick doesn't let her? I mean, I don't know. It is tough. Mike says, I see Milchick as more of a villain than Cobell because he's trying to shroud his deeds in a caring cloak. And that can sometimes be a little bit worse when you kind of project yourself as being this nice boss, this instituting all of these kindness reforms, only to have that kind of deep evilness hidden right beneath the surface, where you're, like you said, you're masking your bad deeds as good deeds. You're putting on this fake front. Sometimes that deception can be a little bit more evil than a character that is just outright and open and honest, like Cobell is. Cobell is definitely a villain, but I feel like we know where we stand with Cobell. We know what to expect from her. Milchick is one of those characters where you don't kind of know what to expect. I feel like we're getting to learn a little bit more about him now, especially after seeing this. But before this, Milchick was one of those characters where a lot of people wanted to root for him. A lot of people do
Yeah.
like Milchick. I mean, he's a phenomenal actor. He's one of the most intriguing characters. So I do totally understand why a lot of people gravitate towards him and do want to see him have that redemption arc. He is one of those kind of presence in the show that you kind of want to root for him, even though it's very hard to, and it's even harder to now. And Matt Gilbert asks a very interesting question that I will ask each and every one of you in the chat as well, and you as well, PM. What do you think? I mean, I know you just mentioned some possibilities, but do you think we can ever forgive Milkshake? Is there any deed out there that can make us, or at least the people that don't, see him in a favorable light? Is there anything that can truly redeem Milkshake? And I do tend to agree with you. I mean, rescuing Gemma is at least have to be part of it, right?
I mean, it would have to be everything, all or
Yeah.
nothing at this point, because I completely agree with the chat that knows all. it's more evil to lend a smile and to make somebody feel like you might provide comfort and then to not provide it, than to just be upfront about who you are. Can we forgive him? If he rescues Gemma and brings the company down, then yes. If not, if he does anything less than that, I'm just not going to be a fan the way that I used to be, guys. And I loved him. He was my favorite. I really like believed in him. I bought his smile. I thought that he was genuine. And he just broke my heart. He completely shattered my heart. I don't even want Mini Milkshake to be like him because that's how evil I think that he genuinely is. I want Mini Milkshake to be different than him. I don't even want her to be Mini Milkshake anymore. But
I know, man, I know.
it makes me think, how ironic is it that somebody that is doing this to Gemma, and he knows that he's doing this to Gemma, is also looking for comfort himself. Because every time he talks to Natalie from the board and he tries to say, hey, could we talk about the emotions that the paintings could arise, she gives him no comfort, she gives him no alliance. How ironic is it that he's trying to look for comfort in the company and comfort and alliance and ally, while he's also doing this to the innies, and they're looking for comfort, they're looking for an ally, for somebody that could help them. So
Yeah.
I was feeling bad about that whole thing with Natalie, and now I feel glad because he's doing all of this for this company, and this company does not care about him.
It is very true. It is that kind of one-sided loyalty, isn't it? And I get the feeling that's exactly what Lumon wants to cultivate in their employees. The idea where the employee maybe thinks that the company is loyal to them too, but in all actuality, it's the employer being loyal to it's the employee being loyal to the employer and really getting nothing in return apart from these kind of cheap perks that they prop up to mean more than they ever will actually mean. Like there's not very much special about a Chinese finger trap, although Dylan has been kind of programmed to love them and think that they're the coolest thing in the world because Lumon crafts that image of these perks. So no, that's a very good point. It is a one-sided loyalty in a sense, and Milchick it just seems like he hasn't quite figured that out yet. He is still, unfortunately, very loyal to a company that essentially just is not loyal to him yet. It's tragic, and yeah, you start to wonder, will he ever come to that realization? And if he does, is there anything that he can do to ever redeem himself? And we already have some people saying, I'm never going to call him Milkshake again. He's back to being Milkshake. Yeah, maybe he lost the privilege of Milkshake. That's a very good point. Very good point. Milkshake would have to free Dylan, free Gemma, and bring back Irv and smash the paintings. I mean, he might have to do all of those things. That's actually a very good point. I mean, definitely smash and burn those paintings for starters, get those things out of existence, finally realize that he has been playing for the wrong team the entire time, and then actively work at undoing his mistakes. And that is the only way he can undo his mistakes. He needs to go and help the innies. He needs to help MDR ultimately escape and topple Lumon. Will Milchick ever get to a point where he is brave enough to go against the company in that profound of a manner? I don't know. Will Milchick ever get there? And we do have a poll up. I did just recently put up a poll. You guys can vote. The question is super simple. Can Milkshake find redemption? Is it possible for Milkshake to find redemption at some point? And so far we have 63% of the chat says yes, he can find redemption, while 37% is saying no redemption for Milkshake. Oof, interesting. Yeah, I tend to agree with you, PM. I think if he ever is going to have any kind of redemption, he has a long road ahead of him. He has to do a lot. He has to undo a lot of the bad deeds he has done before he can ever think about having a true redemption arc. Is it possible? Yes, I do think it's possible, but it is going to be a lot of work, and he is going to have to really wake up and commit himself to being against Lumon. And I get the feeling that's going to be a very long time before Milchick comes to the realization that he's been playing for the wrong team. Because at the end of the day, it's harder to see things when you are at the center of them. When you are the eye of the storm, it's hard to see the forest through the trees, as it were. So for Milchick, I think it's going to take something that is going to have to be a sort of paradigm shift for him to fully realize the brunt of all the mistakes that he has committed. Because while he's in the middle of it, in the middle of being in Lumon's, being enthralled by Lumon, it's going to take quite a lot for him to kind of snap out of it and realize, yeah, maybe I have been playing for the wrong team. Maybe some of these deeds I've been doing for this company aren't the best choices. And I have to imagine he's a smart guy too. And he does seem like at times he does have some semblance of morals, albeit misguided as they are. So I have to know he already knows what he's doing is wrong. It just seems like he's not brave enough to confront that and change it yet. He's still too loyal to Lumon. But I don't know. Will he ever snap out of it? He will only find redemption through a meaningful act of sacrifice. And that could potentially be it as well. I mean, not maybe going as far as to realizing his misdeeds, helping rescue Gemma, the innies, all of that. Maybe all of that isn't enough. Maybe there is some kind of self-sacrifice, some kind of act of sacrifice that he will ultimately have to do to fully gain that kind of redemption. That is definitely possible as well, for sure.
I like that, Michael. I'd like that it would be like actual sacrifice, maybe even physical sacrifice. Maybe he puts his own physical self in harm's way, or he gives his life in order to save the innocent Gemma. Then I would call him Milkshake again and Mini Milkshake, and I'll forgive him.
Yes. Then I will probably forgive him, indeed. Yeah, he's a true believer. Indeed, he very much is a true believer. We lost Milchick to the Deederade. He drank the Kool-Aid, or the Deederade, as it were. I like it, Bill Chill. He did, indeed. Damn it, Seth. Turn it on. Yes, Seth. Love it. Absolutely love it. Yes, if he rescues her at the end. And I think it's going to take a little more than him just rescuing her. I think him rescuing her is definitely one of those acts that he has to do, especially considering that he is her literal jailer. He is literally jailing her, where he specifically didn't want to be the jailer for the MDR crew at the beginning of the season. So it's a direct contradiction to who he wanted to be as a boss, with one employee to the next. So yeah, him rescuing her definitely has to be one of the requirements for sure. The scene of him dancing at the party was one of the creepiest, tense scenes in the whole show. I love the music dance experience. I think that was one of the funnest episodes ever. And I recently heard in an interview from Trammell Tillman, who plays Milchick, he actually recently stated that the music dance experience, that was not originally in the script. That originally was not a scene they were ever going to do. That wasn't written in the original version of that episode. That was something they just thought of when they were actively filming that episode, and they just threw it in there on a whim. And that's incredibly interesting to realize, that this music dance experience was not originally in the episode, how we almost didn't even get the music dance experience. And in hindsight, it really has become one of the most famous Severance scenes in the entire series. Like, can any of us imagine Severance? Can you imagine Severance without the music dance experience now?
Not at all. And it makes me wonder, the ceiling had lights that he turns on. So did they think of it and then they installed the ceiling? Because it looked like everything was set up in a way where I was very impressed that the ceiling did that at all. And if it wasn't planned, was the lighting already there? I can't imagine Severance without it. So I still like his moves. I still will give him that. But I still don't like him.
Yeah, I like his moves, but he's got a lot. He's got a lot of misdeeds that he's going to need to undo. There's a lot of baggage there for him to ever fully get a real redemption arc, for sure. It perfectly captured how awkward it is when corporate tries to do something fun.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed, indeed. I imagine you have more experience with this than I do. Like, are there other events that corporate events try to put on that just end up being awkward?
Everything, just about everything, Michael. I know you've suffered through the Secret Santa. We talked about this in Jeremy's Discord, but the Secret Santas that they put on, right? How awkward it is that somebody doesn't want your gift. And they make it very like obvious, like, I don't want this gift. I want a different gift, or the potlucks, right? I always hated participating in the potlucks because you have to try everyone's food. And if you don't try it, then it's like, hey, I didn't see you grab my deviled eggs. Why didn't you try the deviled eggs, right? And it becomes like super weird, super awkward. Um, Anything dancing with your coworkers is just not a good look. Christmas
Hmm.
parties, Christmas office party, anything like that is just uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's yeah, it can be a little bit awkward. Yeah. Oh my God, Secret Santa. They used to make all these women sit on the old dude's lap was so cringe and weird. Oh, geez. Yeah, it sounds cringe and weird. Sounds very cringe and weird. I always forget, Mike, that you worked in the corporate space as well. Michael Bancroft, of course, is a longtime friend of the channel, phenomenal, phenomenal artist and comic book creator. He's got a really brilliant comic book series out that is available right now for purchase. It's called The Lucent. The first issue is called Waking Dream. The second issue is called Painted Death. It's my personal favorite independent comic story that is out on the market right now. Mike has been killing it, doing everything himself, from the art, the writing, all of it. And yeah, dude, I totally forgot that you worked in the corporate structure for a while before you became a comic book artist. And I know, PM also has vast experience in corporate America as well. So yeah, you guys have a unique perspective on a lot of the stuff that we see here in Severance, that I was super surprised to learn that a lot of this stuff is kind of drawn on real world corporate America stuff and just the corporate structure in general. It's crazy to know that a lot of this stuff really happens. It's fucking nuts. So nuts.
Yeah. I always remember one of my favorite things, and you do the perfect, um, you say it perfectly. But when Dylan is doing that, like activating the overtime contingency, and Milkshake is offering him everything that the company has to offer, you realize what the company has to offer them is nothing. He's like
Mhm.
screaming about the coffee cozies.
Yep, that's right. I forgot
It's like,
about
well,
that.
the company doesn't, when you think about it, it's not, you don't have anything to offer, but he's throwing like everything that he has, and it's coffee cozies, right?
Yes, indeed. Man, and still to this day, I love just thinking about just seeing the excitement and the joy on Irving's face when he learns about the new tote bags that are coming in. Like, just the little stuff like that that just makes this show so authentic and paints it in. Yes, a lot of these things are being dramatized for a TV series, but they are rooted in real world things that actually happen in the corporate world. So yeah, absolutely great point from the awesome PM as usual. But yeah, no, you guys have been killing it this evening. You have had some awesome, awesome stuff. Great theories, great predictions. Mike says my current workplace is pretty chill, but yeah, I've worked in some very Lumen type places. Well, I'm glad you're in a at least a chiller place now. That is good. I don't know if I could handle a Lumen like setting. I might be able to handle the corporate setting if it wasn't crazy Lumen esque, but yeah, I don't know if I'd want to be Luminized for sure. Corporate meaningless perks, indeed, and that's what's so funny about these are essentially kind of just meaningless perks that you can get at any store on the outside world, yet the company props them up and puts them on a pedestal to make you believe that this is the greatest award imaginable, something as simple as, again, the finger traps. So yeah, very interesting to see the kind of mental manipulation angle that does exist in the corporate structure, how there is some kind of manipulation to it in a sense. Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. But as we get ready to wrap this up now, one thing we always like to do is ask each and every one of you in the chat, and of course, also would love to get PM's response. Where do you guys rank this episode of Severance? Every week we try to give them a rating on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being horrible and 10 being perfect. Where do you guys in the chat give episode 7 of Severance? Where do you rank it on a scale from 1 to 10? And what about you, PM? Where's your ranking at for episode 7, you think?
It was such a great episode. It has to be a 9. I'm usually generous and I would give everything a 10, but it was so, you know what? A 10. I'm going to go 10. Yeah. It was beautiful.
Nice.
It was the cinematography, the outfits, the wardrobe, the acting, of course, amazing. So I'm going to say 10. Yeah.
10. I love it. I love it because, yeah, this episode did have a little bit of everything. Everything that I love about Severance, this episode had, and then some. I love the cinematography, but the cinematography in this episode is probably the best I've seen it on the entire series up until this point. So yeah, I mean, I was going to originally give this one a 9, but I'm going to give it a 9.5. This is definitely my highest rated episode of the season so far, just in terms of structure, in terms of how it was executed, the concepts therein. Everything about this episode was just carefully and meticulously crafted. And for me, the big standout is definitely the cinematography. I've always been a stickler for good cinematography. So when I see a show that is already thriving in that area, take it up a notch and make it even better, which I didn't even think was possible in Severance case, that impresses me a lot, along with keeping the storyline and the storytelling kind of at that same level of quality. So yeah, I was originally going to go 9, but I got to up it to a 9.5 after watching the episode a few more times. And after this discussion, 9.5 for me for episode 7. Definitely my highest rated episode of the season so far. I thought it was great. And it looks like we also got some 10s in the chat as well. PM gave it a 10, which is awesome. We got 1 10. We got another 10 from James. We got an 8 in the chat as well. Awesome, awesome, awesome. We got another 10 in the chat from Jen. We got a KC giving it a 9. We got a 10 from Megan, an 8.5 from Dizzy Guy Express, a 9.5 from Meaning. Very, very good. Peach giving it a 10. Mary giving it a 10. Big Chill giving a 7.6, which isn't bad. I mean, again, and that's the thing about Severance. You know, what might be one person's favorite episode might be someone else's least favorite episode, and that is totally fine. We just love hearing what everybody thinks, your genuine, honest opinion. And if it was a 7.6, Big Chill, then by God, it's a 7.6, my friend, and I love to hear it. We got Quan Solo giving it a 9.9999999 pineapples. Indeed. Kiwi Skirt giving it an 8. We got Toothless Paste giving it an 8 as well. We got Ronald giving it a 10. A lot of 10s, a lot of 9s and 10s in the chat tonight. This episode definitely seemed to resonate with people. Matt Gilbert giving it a 9.89. Super good score. We got a 10 waffles from Peach. Xavier giving it a 9.5 as well. Love that. I'm changing mines to a 9. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. A 9 is a solid score. Loved it. Oh my God, I cannot wait for Thursday. Yes, that's kind of the feeling I had too. Coming out of this episode, I can't wait for these final 3. Laura Butler gives it a 5, which again is totally fine. If this episode didn't scratch the itch for you, there is nothing wrong with that. That is totally fine. Not every episode is ultimately going to be for everyone. So that is totally fine. Big score or high score, totally cool. I thought the Severance floor was bad, but the testing floor is literal hell on earth. That is a good point. Right. I mean, you're kind of right. Yeah, I mean, we did think the Severance floor itself was bad enough, but now seeing the testing room floor, shit.
I'll do refinement all day long. It's like, I'll do the macro that refinement as long as I don't have to do what Gemma's doing.
Really, absolutely. I mean, any day of the week, sit me behind that computer and make me look at scary numbers all day, as opposed to what they are putting poor Gemma through. Absolutely. It's just from one nightmare to literal hell. A nightmare to hell. That's the difference. I'd much rather be stuck in a nightmare than I would be stuck in hell. But Mike's giving it a 9. I can only give it a 9 because it made my wife sad. I'm sorry to hear that.
Aw.
I am sorry to hear that.
But I love the
Yeah,
solidarity with your wife. That's very kind of you.
very kind, very good to stick together, indeed. Um, yeah, I mean, it was a sad episode at times. This episode did play with some very interesting and tough concepts, from miscarriages to having trouble conceiving to just seeing a beautiful marriage turn very strained and turn into something that unfortunately just has lost all its magic at the end, to ultimately being confronted with Mark believing he lost her entirely. And then when you talk about everything that's happening to her on the severed floor and all the torture that she is being put through down there, it is a bit of a sad episode. So yeah, I can totally understand that on her part for thinking it's a little bit sad. Definitely, for sure. For sure. Awesome stuff, guys. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening on our Sevi Saturday, which has quickly become my favorite night of the week. I love diving into these new episodes with each and every one of you. And of course, my awesome, phenomenal co-host, PM Philosophy. If you guys have not already subscribed to PM's channel, definitely get over there and give her a sub.
Oh, we lost Jeremy. Yep, we lost him. Well, thank you so much, guys. Yes, please subscribe. He's back. Can't hear you, Jeremy. I think you're muted.
There we go. I guess it would not be a Jeremy Ice and Fire stream if I didn't hit a wrong button at least once. So thank you so much. But no, this was a phenomenal episode again. Love diving into these topics with each and every one of you. But if you guys have not already, subscribe to PM Philosophy's channel. She's got some awesome Severance content already uploaded as well, and she will always be putting out more. I know you're working on a video right now, which I cannot wait to see you complete and finish, which I know is going to be great. So if you guys have not subscribed to her, definitely give her a sub. You can find the description or the link to her channel in the description of the stream below. Head over there, give her a sub, and keep an eye out for her latest video that I imagine will probably be coming out pretty soon. And I will also be putting out my episode 7 full complete breakdown up on the channel tomorrow. I was trying to get it out today, but I got a little bit sidetracked with some other real life stuff that I had to handle. So tomorrow on the channel, I will be uploading my episode 7 breakdown. And then probably a day later, I will have my episode 8 trailer breakdown and predictions video up on the channel as well. But again, I want to give a huge thank you to each and every single one of you for joining us on these fine Sevi Saturday night evenings. And of course, another huge thank you to my wonderful co-host, PM Philosophy, who I promise I will not hit the wrong button and dip on you again. I promise. But thank you so much for joining me, as always. And until next time, stay safe out there, guys, in this crazy severed world we live in. Keep those tinfoil hats on, folks, and I will see you on the next one.